Everyone thinks SpongeBob and Patrick have been best friends since the day they were born. No fights that ever mattered. No cracks that ever lasted. The official show record tells a very different story. In this video, we break down why Patrick isn't actually SpongeBob's friend. Section 1. The friendship nobody can explain. Bikini Bottom sits at the bottom of the ocean, and in the middle of it stands a pineapple. Inside that pineapple lives SpongeBob SquarePants, a yellow sea sponge with square pants who works as a fry cook at a restaurant called the Krusty Krab. Right next door to the pineapple, buried under a large rock, lives Patrick Star, a pink starfish who has no job and spends most of his time sleeping, eating, or coming up with ideas that rarely make sense. Between the two of them stands a house shaped like a stone head from Easter Island, and inside that house lives an octopus named Squidward Tentacles, who wants nothing more than peace and quiet, and almost never gets it. This setup has stayed the same since the show began in 1999. Steven Hillenburg created SpongeBob SquarePants, and Nickelodeon has kept the show running for more than 2 decades since then. Over hundreds of episodes and several movies, one thing has stayed constant through every season, every format change, and every new writer who has worked on the show. SpongeBob and Patrick are best friends. Not friends who occasionally spend time together, not neighbors who happen to get along, best friends in the fullest sense the show can offer, the kind who show up for each other without being asked and without expecting anything back. For most of the series, the show presented this friendship as something that had always existed, going back to the day they were both born. Several early episodes treat their bond as something neither of them can remember not having. There was no origin story needed because as far as the show was concerned, there was no beginning to find. They had simply always been there for one another, the same way a person might always have had 2 hands. That changed in 2020. The SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run, gave the friendship an actual starting point for the first time. In that movie, SpongeBob and Patrick meet as children at a summer camp called Camp Coral. The film shows them as kids, not yet grown into their adult lives in Bikini Bottom, forming their bond through shared experiences at camp rather than being born into it. This was a real change to how the franchise had always described their history, and it gave fans a clear origin point that the original series never bothered to establish. Even with that update, the older idea still shows up elsewhere in the franchise, and the show has never gone back to erase or explain away the earlier version. Both versions exist now, side by side, one saying they were always friends, and one saying they became friends as young kids at camp. Either way, the point remains the same. Whether their bond formed at birth or formed at a summer camp, the friendship between SpongeBob and Patrick is treated by the show as one of the most solid relationships in the entire cast. The show pushes this idea even further in a handful of episodes that reach back before either of them existed. Episodes such as SB129, Ugh, and Pest of the West all include scenes showing ancestors of the SquarePants and Star families interacting across different points in history, sometimes prehistoric, sometimes in the Old West. These scenes suggest that the bond between the two families goes back generations, almost like a tradition passed down without either side really trying. It gives the friendship a strange kind of weight, as if it were less of a choice and more of an inheritance. This detail carries a small joke buried inside it too, since in real life, starfish are known to eat sea sponges. The show never addresses this directly, but longtime viewers have pointed it out for years, noting that despite this fact of ocean life, a star and a SquarePants have never once turned on each other over something like nature or instinct. The friendship also comes with a physical symbol. SpongeBob and Patrick are members of something called the Best Friends Forever Club, and to prove it, they each wear a small ring. The ring is more than just jewelry. In at least one episode, Opening it reveals a tiny mechanical scene inside, with small figures of SpongeBob and Patrick that move and play a short tune celebrating their friendship. It is a strange little object, but it fits the show's sense of humor, where even something as simple as a friendship ring can turn into a miniature musical toy. The existence of a club, complete with membership rings, tells viewers that this friendship was never something casual. It was something they built structure around, something they treated with a kind of seriousness that neither of them treats most other parts of their lives. Despite the seriousness of the symbol, the day-to-day version of their friendship rarely looks serious at all. Most of what SpongeBob and Patrick do together involves activities that make no sense to anyone else in Bikini Bottom. They go jellyfishing in a field just outside of town, using nets to catch jellyfish that they never seem to do anything with once caught. They blow bubbles for fun, treating bubble blowing less like a simple pastime and more like an art form or even a competitive sport. They visit Goo Lagoon, the local beach, and get into trouble there almost every time. They invent games out of nothing, turning empty afternoons into elaborate pretend scenarios that usually end with some kind of mess for Squidward to clean up or complain about. None of these activities require much planning or any real goal. The two of them simply enjoy being around each other, and the show treats that simple enjoyment as reason enough for most of what happens in a given episode. Part of what makes the friendship interesting to watch is how different the two characters are from each other. SpongeBob has a job. He shows up to work at the Krusty Krab almost every single day, takes pride in his work, and has been named Employee of the Month more times than anyone can count. He studies for his boating school license constantly, even though he fails his driving test over and over again. He follows rules, gets excited about small things like a new spatula or a clean grill, and treats his job like it matters, even when nobody else seems to think a fry cook position should mean that much to someone. Patrick, by contrast, has no job at all. He sleeps under a rock, and the show has made a running joke out of how little effort he puts into anything. He often forgets basic facts, misunderstands simple instructions, and reacts to situations in ways that make no logical sense, yet somehow works out anyway. Where SpongeBob is driven and eager, Patrick is relaxed to the point of being almost horizontal at all times. On paper, these two characters should have very little in common, and yet this mismatch is exactly what makes their friendship work as well as it does within the show. SpongeBob provides the energy and the plans. Patrick provides the company and, often without meaning to, some strange piece of advice that ends up being exactly what the moment needed. Squidward, living directly between them, ends up as the third piece of the picture almost every time SpongeBob and Patrick are involved in anything. He rarely wants to be included, and he almost never enjoys what they're doing. But the geography of Bikini Bottom puts his house in the middle of theirs, which means their noise, their games, and their general chaos regularly spill into his life, whether he likes it or not. Squidward has spent years trying to get some peace from his two neighbors, and the show has built entire episodes just around his attempts to separate himself from them, attempts that almost always fail. Across the run of the show, this three-way dynamic between SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward has stayed remarkably steady. New characters have come and gone. New settings have been introduced. The show has added movies, spin-off specials, and even an entirely different show centered on young versions of these same characters at camp. Through all of it, the pineapple, the rock, and the tiki head have remained fixed points in Bikini Bottom, and the friendship at the center of two of those three homes has remained one of the show's most dependable features. This is the version of the friendship most viewers know by heart. Two best friends, bonded since birth or since summer camp, depending on which part of the franchise gets asked, wearing matching rings, chasing jellyfish, blowing bubbles, and driving their neighbor up the wall without even trying. It is presented as steady. It is presented as unshakable. Multiple episodes even use lines from Patrick or SpongeBob describing the bond as something that could never actually break, no matter what happens between them. But steady is not the same as untouched. Underneath the surface version of this friendship, the one built on rings and shared history and matching interests, the actual episodes tell a more complicated story. Across the decades this show has aired, there have been real moments, shown directly on screen and confirmed through the episodes themselves, where SpongeBob and Patrick stop being friends. Not disagreements that get glossed over in a single scene. Actual declarations, sometimes shouted, sometimes calm, stating that the friendship is over. Some of these moments come from outside interference. Some come from jealousy. Some come from one of them changing in a way the other cannot keep up with. Some come from nothing more than a toy, or a quiz, or a box that was never supposed to matter this much. Each of these moments exists somewhere in the official record of the show. They are not fan theories or exaggerated internet claims. They happened in aired episodes, written by the show's creative team, animated and voiced and broadcast the same as any other segment. Some of them resolve within minutes. Others stretch across an entire episode before finding their way back to normal. All of them chip away, even briefly, at the idea that this friendship could never actually end. What makes this worth looking at closely is not that the friendship survives. Everyone already knows it survives, since the show has continued for over 20 years with both characters still living next door to each other. What matters more is looking at exactly how close it has come to not surviving, and what caused it each time. Some of the causes are outside forces working against them. Some of the causes come from inside the friendship itself, built from nothing more than the two of them being who they are. There is a version of this friendship built entirely out of highlight reels, bubbles, jellyfishing trips, matching rings, a summer camp memory, or a claim of being friends since birth. That version gets repeated in clip compilations and nostalgic tributes constantly, and none of it is wrong. It happened. It is canon. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But it leaves out the other half of the story, the half where two best friends stood in front of each other and meant it when they said they weren't friends anymore. That other half is where the real story sits. Section 2. Naughty Nautical Neighbors. The first time SpongeBob and Patrick ever ended their friendship on screen happened all the way back in Season 1 in an episode called Naughty Nautical Neighbors. This episode aired in 1999, during the earliest run of the show, before Bikini Bottom had grown into the huge world of characters and storylines fans know today. At this point in the series, the core trio of SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward had already been established as neighbors living side by side, but the show had not yet shown what would happen if the bond between the two best friends actually broke. The episode starts on a fairly normal day. Squidward is in his kitchen making a soufflé, a fancy baked dish that takes careful attention and a fair amount of effort to get right. He is proud of it, and he is looking forward to sitting down and enjoying it in peace. Squidward almost never gets peace living where he does, sandwiched between a hyperactive sponge and a lazy but equally loud starfish. And this day is no different. Right outside his window, SpongeBob and Patrick are having what looks like an ordinary conversation, except they are doing it in a strange way. Instead of talking normally, they are blowing bubbles and whispering messages into them before letting them float over to each other. When a bubble reaches its target and pops, the person hearing it gets to hear whatever message was whispered inside. This might sound like a small detail, but it becomes the entire foundation for everything that happens next in the episode. SpongeBob and Patrick treat this bubble messaging as one of their favorite games, laughing constantly as the bubbles drift back and forth between them. Squidward, trying to enjoy his soufflé in the middle of all this noise, cannot focus. The non-stop laughter and bubble popping from right outside his window ruins his ability to enjoy the one nice thing he made for himself that day. This frustration builds until Squidward decides he has had enough and comes up with an idea to solve the problem for good. His plan is simple in idea, but effective in execution. Squidward realizes that a leftover liquid from making his soufflé can be used to blow bubbles of his own. Since SpongeBob and Patrick have already shown him exactly how their bubble messaging system works, Squidward figures out that he can use the same method against them. He starts blowing his own bubbles, imitating the voices of SpongeBob and Patrick as closely as he can, and fills these bubbles with insults instead of friendly messages. He sends these fake bubbles toward SpongeBob and Patrick, making each one believe that the insults are coming from the other. Neither SpongeBob nor Patrick realizes what is actually happening. As far as either of them can tell, the insults floating over in bubble form are genuinely coming from their best friend. There is no reason for either of them to suspect Squidward is involved, since neither of them saw him make the bubbles or heard his voice clearly enough to notice the difference. All they know is that bubbles which look and sound like they are supposed to be friendly messages are suddenly filled with mean comments about their appearance, their intelligence, and anything else Squidward can think to throw in. As more of these fake insult bubbles arrive, the confusion turns into real hurt feelings. SpongeBob and Patrick begin trading actual insults back and forth, no longer through fake bubbles from Squidward, but through their own voices now, believing they are simply defending themselves against comments the other supposedly made first. The insults escalate quickly. Neither character backs down, since each one believes he is only responding to something the other started. What began as a peaceful afternoon of bubble games has turned into a real argument between two best friends who have no idea they are being manipulated. The fight reaches its peak when SpongeBob and Patrick, both furious and hurt, declare loudly that they are no longer friends. This is not a small comment made in passing. It is a clear, direct statement made by both of them, ending the friendship in front of each other. After the declaration, they storm off in opposite directions, each heading back to his own home, refusing to look back or say anything else to the other. SpongeBob returns to his pineapple. Patrick returns to his rock. Neither of them makes any attempt to stop and reconsider what just happened. Squidward, watching all of this unfold from his yard, could not be more pleased with how things turned out. His plan worked exactly the way he hoped it would. He sits down outside with his soufflé, finally able to eat it in peace, laughing to himself about how easily he managed to turn his two annoying neighbors against each other. From his point of view, this is a clean and simple victory. He gets his quiet afternoon back, and the source of his frustration has been removed without him ever having to confront either SpongeBob or Patrick directly. He never has to admit what he did, and as far as he can tell in this moment, he never will have to. What makes this moment interesting, when looking back at it now, is how small the actual cause of the breakup really was. There was no real disagreement between SpongeBob and Patrick. There was no actual insult that either of them said to the other on purpose. The entire fight was built completely out of a trick, something neither of them had any part in creating, and neither of them had any way of detecting in the moment. From the outside, viewers watching the episode can see exactly what is happening, since the show makes it clear to the audience that Squidward is behind everything happening between his two neighbors. But SpongeBob and Patrick, the two people actually living through this fight, have no access to that same information. As far as they know, their best friend turned on them for no reason, and they are simply responding the only way they know how. This detail matters because it sets a pattern that shows up again later in the show, though not always in exactly the same way. Some of the times, SpongeBob and Patrick end their friendship come from something that happens between them directly. This time, the breakup does not come from anything real at all. It comes entirely from outside interference, from someone else pulling the strings, while both of them think they are dealing with each other honestly. It raises a simple but important point about how fragile a friendship can be if enough confusion gets thrown into it from somewhere neither person can see. SpongeBob and Patrick spend years demonstrating a bond that seems impossible to shake, yet in their very first on-screen breakup, that bond cracks in minutes because of nothing more than a batch of soufflé leftovers and an octopus with a grudge against noise. There is also something notable in how quickly and how completely the breakup takes hold, even though it is based on nothing real. Neither SpongeBob nor Patrick pauses to ask questions before declaring the friendship over. Neither of them stops to think about whether the insults actually sound like something the other would say. In the heat of the moment, both of them simply accept what they are hearing and react immediately, without checking if any of it makes sense. This happens quickly enough that by the time either of them might have calmed down enough to question things, the declaration has already been made, and both are already walking home angry. Squidward's satisfaction in this moment says something about his character as well. He does not simply want quiet. He wants the two of them separated so thoroughly that they stop bothering him altogether. And he is willing to trick them both into believing something completely false in order to get that outcome. There is no attempt on his part to talk to either of them honestly about the noise or the disruption. Instead, he takes what feels like the easiest and most immediate solution available to him, even though it involves lying to two people who consider each other best friends and manipulating their trust in one another. For SpongeBob and Patrick, the emotional weight of this breakup, while short, still appears real within the episode. Both of them return to their homes clearly upset, believing that someone they had always trusted turned against them without warning. The show does not treat this moment as something purely comedic, even though the setup involving soufflé bubbles and imitation voices has a silly quality to it. There is a genuine sting to watching two characters who have shown constant loyalty to each other suddenly walk away from one another, angry and hurt, based on something that never actually happened. This gap between how the audience understands the situation and how the characters understand it creates a strange kind of tension. Viewers know the truth. Viewers can see Squidward sitting outside enjoying his soufflé, fully aware of what he has done. But SpongeBob and Patrick have no access to that knowledge, and so their anger and hurt feelings, even though they stem from a lie, come across as completely genuine from their side of things. The show manages to build real emotional stakes out of a situation that the audience already knows is based on nothing, which is not always an easy thing to pull off. Squidward's plan, on the surface, looks like a complete success at this point in the episode. He wanted peace, he wanted his soufflé, and he wanted SpongeBob and Patrick to stop bothering him, and by tricking them into breaking apart, he has gotten exactly what he wanted. There is no reason at this stage of the story for him to think anything else needs to happen. The two best friends are gone, each one sulking separately, and Squidward is finally free to enjoy a quiet moment outside his own house with a dish he worked hard to make. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But sitting outside, enjoying that quiet moment, turns out to be more dangerous than Squidward realizes. Section 3. The reconciliation that saved Squidward's life. After tricking SpongeBob and Patrick into ending their friendship, Squidward sits down outside his house to finally enjoy the soufflé he worked so hard to make. This is the moment he has been waiting for through the entire first half of the episode. No laughter drifting over from next door, no bubbles popping outside his window, No yellow sponge or pink starfish making noise while he tries to eat in peace. For the first time in what feels like a long stretch of days, Squidward has exactly what he wanted, and he intends to enjoy every second of it. He eats his soufflé slowly, clearly savoring the moment as much as the food itself. Between bites, he laughs to himself, thinking about how easily his plan worked. He had expected some resistance, some possibility that his two neighbors might figure out what he had done. But none of that happened. SpongeBob and Patrick walked away from each other, convinced that the insults they heard were genuine, and neither one showed any sign of catching on to the trick. From where Squidward sits, this is about as close to a perfect outcome as he could have hoped for. He got his piece, and he got it without ever having to confront either of them directly or admit what he had actually done. This satisfaction does not last very long. While laughing and eating at the same time, Squidward accidentally swallows the fork he has been using, along with a bite of soufflé. The fork becomes lodged in his throat, and within seconds, what was supposed to be a relaxing and quiet meal turns into a genuine emergency. Squidward begins choking, unable to breathe properly, and the laughter that filled his yard just moments earlier disappears completely. He starts to lose consciousness, and there is nobody around to help him. The very peace and quiet he worked so hard to create by breaking up his neighbors now means there is nobody nearby to notice he is in danger. This detail carries a certain irony that the episode does not spell out directly, but leaves for the audience to notice. Squidward wanted isolation. Squidward got isolation. And in the moment he actually needs another person nearby, that isolation becomes the exact thing that puts his life at risk. Had SpongeBob and Patrick still been outside laughing and blowing bubbles the way they were before Squidward's plan took effect, at least one of them likely would have noticed him choking almost immediately. Instead, his own success in getting rid of them leaves him alone at the worst possible moment. Fortunately for Squidward, Patrick is close enough to notice what is happening. Even though the friendship between SpongeBob and Patrick has just been broken, Patrick is still nearby, likely still processing the sudden falling out he believes just happened with his best friend. When Patrick sees Squidward choking and losing consciousness, he does not hesitate. He rushes over and performs CPR on Squidward, a technique used to help someone breathe again when they cannot breathe on their own. This is a serious, potentially life-saving action, and Patrick, despite his reputation throughout the show as someone who rarely thinks things through or shows much awareness of what is happening around him, reacts quickly and correctly in this moment. The show plays this rescue with a mix of genuine urgency and the same light-hearted tone that runs through the entire episode. Patrick's reaction to the situation carries a certain innocent quality that fits his character perfectly. Even while performing what amounts to an emergency rescue, Patrick's manner stays casual and almost cheerful, as if this kind of thing happens all the time and does not need to be treated with any more seriousness than anything else he does during an average day. This combination, a real emergency handled with total ease, becomes part of what makes the moment work as both a genuine rescue and a piece of entertainment at the same time. Squidward survives, the fork comes free, his breathing returns to normal, and slowly he regains consciousness enough to realize what almost happened to him and who is responsible for saving him. Lying there, having just been pulled back from a situation that could have ended his life, Squidward looks at Patrick differently than he has at any earlier point in the episode. Patrick did not know about the trick Squidward played to break up his friendship with SpongeBob. Patrick did not hold a grudge against Squidward, or hesitate because of anything related to the argument that just happened. Patrick simply saw someone in trouble and helped, without asking questions and without needing a reason beyond the fact that help was needed. In response to this, Squidward refers to Patrick as a friend. This is a significant moment for Squidward's character, since throughout the show, Squidward almost never expresses warmth toward his two neighbors. He spends the overwhelming majority of his time trying to avoid SpongeBob and Patrick, complaining about them, or actively working against them in one way or another, as shown just minutes earlier in this very episode. For Squidward to turn around and call Patrick a friend, even briefly, stands out as unusual given everything else viewers already know about how he normally feels about the two of them. Patrick's reaction to being called a friend by Squidward is immediate and full of genuine happiness. He becomes overjoyed at the idea that Squidward considers him a friend, responding with real excitement to something that, for most other characters, might seem like a fairly small gesture. This reaction says something important about Patrick as a character. Despite his simple nature and his tendency to misunderstand complicated situations, Patrick values friendship deeply and reacts with sincere joy any time someone treats him as a genuine friend, regardless of the circumstances that led to that moment. Squidward, perhaps caught up in the relief of having just survived a near-fatal choking incident, confirms the friendship, though he adds a small qualifier to it, making clear that he sees this as strictly a friendly relationship and nothing more. Even in a moment of genuine gratitude, Squidward maintains a bit of his usual reserved and slightly annoyed personality, unwilling to fully commit to the kind of enthusiastic friendship that SpongeBob and Patrick usually show toward each other. This small detail keeps Squidward's character consistent even during an unusual moment of warmth, since a complete personality change would feel out of place given how the rest of the show portrays him. Not long after this exchange, another moment occurs between Squidward and Patrick that adds a bit more complexity to their brief friendship. Squidward decides to play his clarinet, an instrument he practices often throughout the show, usually without much skill despite years of effort. While Squidward plays, Patrick falls asleep on him, apparently comfortable enough around Squidward now to relax completely in his presence. Squidward, however, does not appreciate this. He becomes frustrated by having Patrick sleeping on him while he tries to play his music. And in his irritation, he drags Patrick away forcefully enough that he ends up spraining his own back in the process. This small sequence shows how quickly Squidward's patience runs out, even with someone who just saved his life only a short time earlier. It reinforces the idea that Squidward's tolerance for both SpongeBob and Patrick, even in moments where genuine gratitude exists, has a very short limit. He can express real thanks toward Patrick for the rescue, and almost immediately afterward, find himself annoyed enough by Patrick's behavior to physically remove him in a way that hurts himself in the process. This inconsistency captures something true about Squidward across the entire series. His feelings toward his neighbors shift quickly, moving between genuine appreciation and complete irritation, sometimes within the same conversation. After spraining his back while dragging Patrick away, Squidward ends up needing help, and this is where SpongeBob enters the picture again. SpongeBob helps Squidward with his injury, and in response to this help, the two of them become friends as well, at least for the moment. This mirrors what happened earlier with Patrick almost exactly. Squidward, injured or in trouble, receives help from one of his neighbors, and that help results in a temporary friendship forming between them, however brief or however qualified that friendship might be. With both SpongeBob and Patrick now separately on friendly terms with Squidward, though still not speaking to each other after their earlier breakup, Squidward and SpongeBob decide to play music together. This detail rounds out a strange sequence of events where Squidward, originally trying to get away from both of his neighbors entirely, ends up with each of them individually attached to him in some way, filling the space that used to belong to their friendship with each other. This sets up the next phase of the episode, where Squidward realizes that having SpongeBob and Patrick as separate friends, rather than as friends with each other, might not actually solve his original problem. Squidward decides to invite both SpongeBob and Patrick to a dinner party, though he does not tell either one that the other person has also been invited. His reasoning for this appears to be an attempt to mend the friendship between them, even though just a short time earlier, he was the one responsible for breaking it apart to begin with. This shift in his goals says something about how quickly circumstances can change someone's priorities, especially once that person has experienced something as serious as almost losing consciousness or as immediate as a strained back. When SpongeBob and Patrick arrive at Squidward's house for what each of them believes is a normal dinner invitation, they discover the other person is also there. Neither of them expected this, and neither of them has moved past the anger from their earlier fight. Despite being in the same room again, they remain upset with one another, refusing to talk or acknowledge each other in any meaningful way. Squidward's attempt at repairing the friendship does not go smoothly right away, since simply putting two angry people in the same space does not automatically undo whatever caused the anger in the first place. Trying to find a way to get them speaking again, Squidward offers them soda, hoping that sharing a drink together might break the tension. Instead of leading to a calm conversation, the soda offer turns into a competition. SpongeBob and Patrick, still refusing to actually talk to each other or resolve their disagreement directly, instead start competing over who can drink the most soda, treating the contest as a way to prove which of them deserves to be considered Squidward's friend instead of the other. This turns Squidward's attempt at a peaceful dinner into something closer to a contest of stubbornness, with both of them drinking large amounts of soda purely to outdo the other rather than to enjoy themselves or make peace. Squidward eventually runs out of soda to give them and leaves to get more, telling them to stay and talk while he is gone. Left alone together, still visibly upset with each other, SpongeBob and Patrick do not speak. Instead of using this time to work through their disagreement, they simply sit in silence, both of them now extremely full from all the soda they drank during the contest, refusing to look at or acknowledge one another. This moment captures how firmly they are both sticking to their anger, even when given an obvious opportunity to fix things while unsupervised. The turning point finally arrives not through any conversation or apology, but through something almost entirely accidental. Because of how much soda they both drank, SpongeBob begins to hiccup. These hiccups produce small bubbles that make a burping sound whenever they pop. This unexpected and slightly ridiculous sound catches Patrick's attention, and despite everything that happened earlier in the episode, he finds it funny. The two of them start laughing together, reacting to something neither of them planned or controlled, something that has nothing to do with settling their earlier disagreement, and everything to do with a shared, spontaneous reaction to something silly happening between them. This shared laughter becomes the moment where their friendship reconnects. Unlike the earlier attempts by Squidward to force them back together through conversation or shared activities, the actual reconciliation between SpongeBob and Patrick happens through something small, unplanned, and completely outside of anyone's control. Neither of them apologizes directly. Neither of them explains what went wrong or works through the confusion caused by Squidward's earlier trick. They simply end up laughing at the same ridiculous thing at the same time, and that shared moment becomes enough to erase the anger that built up between them earlier in the episode. This detail says something important about how SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship tends to work throughout the show, not just in this specific episode. Time and again, across many different episodes, their disagreements tend to resolve not through long conversations or careful explanations, but through some shared, often silly experience that reminds both of them why they enjoy being around each other in the first place. Their friendship does not appear to depend heavily on working through every disagreement with words. It depends more on shared moments, however small or accidental those moments happen to be. However, their renewed laughter comes with an unexpected physical consequence. Because they had each consumed so much soda during their earlier drinking contest, their combined laughter and continuous hiccuping produces an overwhelming number of bubbles. SpongeBob had reportedly consumed 14 glasses of soda during the earlier contest, while Patrick had consumed 12. This massive amount of carbonated soda, combined with their sudden fit of laughter, creates enough bubbles to cause serious damage. The bubbles multiply rapidly, and this buildup ends up causing Squidward's house to collapse entirely. This detail returns the episode to a comedic tone, right after its more emotional reconciliation moment. Just as SpongeBob and Patrick manage to repair their friendship, their combined reaction accidentally destroys the home of the very person who worked to get them back together. Squidward's house, the same one he lives in and the same one he originally wanted peace and quiet inside of, ends up ruined because of a side effect nobody could have predicted, coming from two best friends laughing too hard after drinking too much soda. When Squidward returns and discovers what has happened to his home, he reacts with immediate frustration. Rather than being pleased that SpongeBob and Patrick have made up, given that repairing their friendship was supposedly his goal for hosting the dinner in the first place, Squidward is far more concerned about the destruction of his house. He angrily kicks both SpongeBob and Patrick out, showing that whatever brief friendships he had formed with each of them individually earlier in the episode, whether through the CPR rescue or through SpongeBob helping with his back injury, do not carry enough weight to stop him from reacting with pure anger now that his house has been destroyed. This time, unlike the earlier part of the episode where SpongeBob and Patrick each helped Squidward through a personal crisis, neither of them stays to help him deal with the destruction of his home. They are kicked out and do not return to assist him the way they did earlier when he was choking or when he hurt his back. Left alone once again, this time surrounded by the wreckage of his own house, Squidward experiences one final piece of misfortune. His door, one of the only parts of his home still standing after the collapse, ends up crushing him. This final moment plays as a kind of karma for everything Squidward set into motion at the start of the episode. He wanted quiet, so he broke up his neighbor's friendship through deception. That deception nearly cost him his life through the choking incident, which Patrick ended up saving him from. His attempt to fix what he broke led to a chain of events that destroyed his house entirely. And in the end, after all of that, he finds himself crushed under his own door, alone, with the two people he manipulated at the start of the episode nowhere in sight to help him this time. Looking at this entire sequence as a whole, the episode moves through several distinct emotional turns within a very short amount of time. It starts with a deliberate act of manipulation from Squidward, moves into a genuine emergency where Patrick saves a life without hesitation, shifts into a strange set of temporary friendships between Squidward and each of his neighbors individually, turns into a forced reconciliation attempt disguised as a dinner party, and ends with an accidental but complete reconciliation between SpongeBob and Patrick that destroys Squidward's house and ultimately leaves him worse off than before he ever started his original plan. The friendship between SpongeBob and Patrick, which had been declared over so decisively earlier in the episode, ends up fully restored by the final scenes, though not through any dramatic apology or heartfelt conversation. It comes back the same way many things do between these two characters throughout the series, through something shared, something a little ridiculous, and something neither of them planned. Their bond, whatever fractures it experiences, seems to find its way back together through simple moments of connection rather than serious discussion. What stands out most looking back at this entire episode is how little the actual disagreement between SpongeBob and Patrick had to do with anything real between them. The entire breakup, start to finish, existed only because of Squidward's manipulation, and the entire reconciliation existed only because of an accident involving too much soda. At no point in the episode do SpongeBob and Patrick sit down and genuinely work through a disagreement of their own creation. Their friendship, at least in this particular episode, gets tested entirely by outside forces and repaired entirely by chance, without either of them ever really confronting what almost tore them apart in the first place. This pattern, a friendship that seems unbreakable most of the time, yet still finds itself broken and repaired through forces neither character fully understands or controls, becomes something worth watching for across the rest of the show. Naughty nautical neighbors set the tone early, showing that even this famously solid friendship could crack under the right kind of pressure, and that fixing it again might not always require the kind of serious effort viewers might expect from two best friends working through a fight. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Not every future disagreement between SpongeBob and Patrick would come from someone else's trick, and not every reconciliation would come from something as simple as shared laughter. Section 4. The Secret Box. Season 2, 2001. By the time Season 2 rolled around, SpongeBob SquarePants had already shown its audience that the friendship between its two lead characters could crack under the right kind of pressure. Naughty nautical neighbors had proven that even a friendship built on years of shared history could break apart in an instant if the wrong outside force got involved. The episode called The Secret Box, which aired in 2001, took a very different approach to testing that same friendship. This time, there was no octopus scheming in the background and no trick being played by anyone outside the friendship itself. This time, the entire conflict came from something small, something private, and something that belonged only to Patrick. The episode begins on an ordinary day, the kind that shows up constantly throughout the series. SpongeBob is excited to go jellyfishing, one of his favorite activities, and he runs over to Patrick's rock, ready to head out with his net in hand. Patrick agrees to come along without hesitation, showing the same easy, automatic willingness to spend time with SpongeBob that defines their entire friendship. Before leaving, though, Patrick says he needs to take care of something first. He tells SpongeBob he has to put away his secret box. This single line changes the entire direction of the episode. SpongeBob, upon hearing the words secret box for the first time, immediately becomes curious. He points out that Patrick has never mentioned anything about a secret box before, and he wants to know what it is. Patrick, holding the box protectively, refuses to explain anything more. He tells SpongeBob to keep his hands off, insisting that the box belongs to him, and that showing what is inside would ruin the entire point of it being secret in the first place. This moment introduces one of the more interesting dynamics explored in this particular episode. Throughout the series, SpongeBob is often shown as an open book, someone who shares his feelings, his excitement, and his thoughts constantly and without much hesitation. Patrick, despite his reputation for being simple-minded and easily confused, reveals in this episode that he is capable of keeping something completely private, something SpongeBob knows nothing about despite their closeness. This alone unsettles SpongeBob more than almost anything else could, since it challenges his assumption that he already knows everything worth knowing about his best friend. Patrick, rather than simply refusing and moving on, decides to tease SpongeBob about the box instead of letting the subject drop. He tells SpongeBob that if he could only see what was inside the box, it would change his life completely. This kind of statement, made so confidently and with such certainty, only deepens SpongeBob's curiosity rather than satisfying it. Patrick seems to enjoy holding this piece of information over his friend, describing the contents of the box as something enormous in importance, without giving away a single detail about what it actually is. SpongeBob responds by trying to downplay how important a secret really is, telling Patrick that everyone already keeps their own secrets and that keeping one is nothing special. He lists off things about himself that he calls secrets, including his own socks, his own bowl for his pet snail Gary, his own television, and even his own private channel on that television, which turns out to just show plain color bars when he switches it on. These examples are clearly not real secrets in any meaningful sense, and the humor comes from how obviously SpongeBob is stretching to compete with whatever Patrick has hidden inside his box. Despite this attempt to seem unbothered, it becomes clear that SpongeBob genuinely wants to know what Patrick is hiding, and cannot let the subject go. Patrick, unmoved by SpongeBob's attempt to seem equally mysterious, doubles down on how important his secret really is. He describes the contents of the box as the most secret thing that exists, claiming that he alone knows what is inside, and that carrying this knowledge is something heavy for him to bear. He insists that nobody else can know what is inside, going so far as to say that not even Squidward's house, sitting right between their two homes, is allowed to learn the secret. This line plays into a small running idea across several episodes of the show, where Squidward's house, shaped like a large stone tiki head, occasionally seems to have a personality or awareness of its own, watching or listening in on the neighborhood the way an actual person might. Here, Patrick treats the house itself as another potential threat to his secret, which shows just how seriously he is taking the idea of protecting whatever is inside that box. SpongeBob attempts to trick Patrick into revealing the secret through several different approaches, but none of them work. Patrick, despite his usual reputation throughout the series for being easy to fool or confuse, manages to hold firm against every attempt SpongeBob makes. This detail stands out because so much of the show relies on Patrick being the character who gets tricked, misled, or confused by simple situations. In this episode, Patrick becomes the one character who cannot be outsmarted, at least when it comes to protecting this one specific secret. Unable to get anywhere through direct questioning or clever tricks, SpongeBob's curiosity only grows stronger as the episode continues. His mind begins to wander toward increasingly dramatic possibilities about what the box might contain. He imagines that it could be holding something like a stolen diamond, something valuable enough to explain why Patrick would guard it so carefully. He also imagines something far darker, wondering if the box might contain something like severed heads, an idea that fits the show's occasional willingness to include strange, slightly unsettling humor even within a series aimed largely at younger audiences. He also considers the possibility that the box holds something like a rare albino jellyfish, tying the mystery back to one of the show's most familiar recurring elements. Finally, he wonders if the box might contain something embarrassing about him specifically, such as a photo from a Christmas party. This last guess turns out to be the correct one, though SpongeBob has no way of knowing that at this point in the episode. The audience does not receive any confirmation either, since the show keeps this possibility as just one option among several increasingly wild guesses SpongeBob makes throughout the episode. This detail becomes important later, since it means SpongeBob technically guesses the truth early on, only to dismiss it later without realizing how close he actually came to solving the mystery on his own. As the day goes on and SpongeBob's curiosity refuses to fade, he becomes so consumed with learning the secret that he decides to take a much more direct approach. Rather than asking Patrick again or trying another verbal trick, SpongeBob decides to sneak into Patrick's home while Patrick is asleep, hoping to look inside the box without Patrick ever knowing he did it. This decision marks a shift in the episode's tone, moving from playful curiosity into something closer to an actual betrayal of trust, even if SpongeBob does not think of it that way himself. Patrick, though usually shown as someone with limited awareness of what happens around him, turns out to be an unusually heavy sleeper who still manages to react physically to things happening near him, even while unconscious. As SpongeBob tries to sneak past him toward the box, Patrick, still fully asleep, grabs onto SpongeBob without waking up and begins pulling on his tongue, mistaking it in his sleep for the string he keeps hidden inside the secret box. This detail, small and strange as it seems in the moment, actually sets up something important that pays off later in the episode, since it shows that pulling this string is clearly a specific and familiar action to Patrick, something ingrained enough in his mind that he repeats the motion even while completely unconscious. Trapped in Patrick's grip and unable to easily free himself, SpongeBob ends up stuck in an uncomfortable position, his tongue being tugged on repeatedly by his sleeping best friend. Eventually, Patrick wakes up, and it becomes obvious to him almost immediately what SpongeBob was attempting to do. Catching his best friend in the middle of trying to sneak a look at his secret box, especially after being told directly and repeatedly not to touch it, understandably upsets Patrick. In this moment, Patrick makes a statement that raises the stakes of the entire episode considerably. He tells SpongeBob that this behavior has crossed the line, and he declares that their friendship is now over. Coming from Patrick, a character who almost never expresses anger toward SpongeBob throughout the series, this declaration carries real weight. Unlike the manipulated breakup shown earlier in Naughty Nautical Neighbors, this moment comes directly from Patrick himself, based entirely on something SpongeBob actually did, without any outside interference or trickery involved. SpongeBob's reaction to hearing this is immediate and emotional, and he appears genuinely hurt and afraid that he has actually lost his best friend over something he thought was a harmless attempt to satisfy his own curiosity. However, almost as quickly as Patrick delivers this serious statement, he undercuts it entirely. In a tone that shifts immediately from anger to casual friendliness, Patrick tells SpongeBob that he was not being serious about ending the friendship, and that SpongeBob can look inside the box if he really wants to. This sudden reversal captures something specific about Patrick's character that shows up across many episodes of the series. Despite occasionally saying dramatic or serious-sounding things, Patrick rarely holds on to anger for very long, and his threats, even ones as significant-sounding as ending a friendship, often turn out to be far less serious than they initially appear. This moment plays as a kind of emotional trick on the audience as much as it does on SpongeBob within the story, building tension through a declaration that gets resolved almost immediately afterward. Relieved and excited, SpongeBob reacts to being allowed to finally see inside the box as though it is one of the most thrilling moments of his entire life. This reaction, while clearly exaggerated for comedic effect, also reflects just how much build-up and anticipation SpongeBob has attached to this single object throughout the episode. After guessing everything from stolen diamonds to severed heads to embarrassing photographs, and after risking an entire friendship just to get a look inside, SpongeBob finally opens the box, fully expecting to find something that matches the scale of mystery Patrick built around it. Instead, the box contains nothing but a single piece of string. SpongeBob's reaction to this reveal is a mixture of confusion and mild disappointment, though he quickly tries to convince himself that this makes sense, telling himself that he probably should have expected something this simple all along. Patrick, meanwhile, reacts to the string with the same level of excitement and seriousness he showed while building up the secret throughout the entire episode, treating the piece of string as though it truly is something remarkable and worthy of all the secrecy surrounding it. SpongeBob, taking Patrick's reaction at face value, agrees that Patrick was right about it being special, even though from any outside perspective, a plain piece of string does not look like much of anything. At this point, SpongeBob leaves, apparently satisfied with having finally solved the mystery, even though what he actually solved turns out to be far less interesting than everything he imagined leading up to this moment. This is where the episode reveals its final and most important twist, one that SpongeBob himself never becomes aware of throughout the entire episode. Once SpongeBob is gone and no longer around to see what happens next, Patrick reveals the true nature of the box to the audience directly. The piece of string inside is not simply a random object kept for no reason. When pulled, the string opens a hidden compartment inside the box, a secret space that was never shown or mentioned to SpongeBob at any point. Inside this hidden compartment sits the actual secret that Patrick has been protecting the entire time, an embarrassing photograph of SpongeBob taken at a Christmas party. The show never actually reveals what this photograph shows to its audience. Viewers see Patrick react to the photograph, laughing at whatever embarrassing image it contains, but the actual picture itself stays hidden from the camera at every point. This decision keeps the joke intact, without giving away specific details that might not hold up well or might feel less funny once actually shown. The mystery of exactly what makes the photograph so embarrassing remains something the audience has to imagine for themselves. Much the same way SpongeBob spent much of the episode imagining what might be hidden inside the box in the first place. This ending detail matters because it confirms that SpongeBob's earlier guess, made casually among several wild possibilities, turns out to be exactly correct. He guessed that the box might contain something embarrassing about him from a Christmas party, and this turns out to be true. However, SpongeBob never learns this. He walks away from the episode believing the box contained nothing more than a piece of string, completely unaware that pulling that string reveals the actual secret Patrick worked so hard to protect throughout the entire episode. The audience receives full knowledge of the truth, while the character most affected by that truth remains in the dark. Similar in some ways to how the audience understood Squidward's manipulation in the previous episode, while SpongeBob and Patrick did not. Looking closely at this episode reveals a very different kind of friendship test compared to the one explored in Naughty Nautical Neighbors. In that earlier episode, the conflict between SpongeBob and Patrick came entirely from someone else's interference, and neither of them had any real disagreement with each other to begin with. In The Secret Box, there is no outside trickster involved at any point. Every moment of tension in this episode comes directly from something happening between SpongeBob and Patrick themselves, built entirely around one character wanting privacy, and the other character being unable to respect that privacy once his curiosity takes hold. This shifts the entire nature of the conflict. Rather than testing whether their friendship can survive outside manipulation, this episode tests something more personal. Whether trust between two best friends can survive one of them refusing to accept a boundary the other one sets. SpongeBob is told clearly and repeatedly that the box is private and that he should not look inside it. Despite this, his curiosity eventually overrides his respect for that boundary, leading him to sneak into Patrick's home while Patrick is sleeping in an attempt to get access to something he has no right to see without permission. This detail places at least part of the responsibility for the near breakup on SpongeBob directly, something that stands in contrast to the earlier episode where SpongeBob bore no responsibility at all for the friendship falling apart. Here, SpongeBob's own actions, driven by nothing more than curiosity about something that was never his business to know, nearly cost him his friendship with Patrick. Unlike Squidward's scheme, there is no outside party to blame this time. The tension exists entirely because of a choice SpongeBob made on his own. At the same time, Patrick's reaction also reveals something about how quickly emotional moments can shift within this friendship. Despite declaring the friendship over in a moment that seems genuinely serious, Patrick reverses this decision within seconds, showing that even a stated ending to their friendship does not necessarily hold much lasting weight once emotions settle even slightly. This raises an interesting question about how seriously statements like this should be taken throughout the show, especially once later episodes reveal other, more sustained versions of the same kind of breakup. Another detail worth examining closely is how differently SpongeBob and Patrick handle secrets throughout this episode. SpongeBob, faced with something Patrick refuses to share, cannot simply let the matter rest. He needs an answer, and he pursues that answer aggressively enough to risk damaging the entire friendship over something that ultimately turns out to be nothing more than an embarrassing photograph. Patrick, by contrast, manages to hold on to his secret successfully for the entire episode, refusing to break under pressure, despite SpongeBob's persistent attempts to trick or convince him otherwise. This contrast paints an interesting picture of how these two characters, despite being best friends who share almost everything with each other on a daily basis, handle privacy in very different ways. SpongeBob struggles considerably with the idea that Patrick might have something hidden from him, treating it almost as a personal challenge that needs to be solved no matter the cost. Patrick, meanwhile, seems entirely comfortable holding on to a private secret, even one connected directly to his best friend, without feeling any need to share it or explain why it needs to remain hidden. The final image of the episode, Patrick alone with the photograph, laughing privately at something SpongeBob will never know about, leaves the friendship technically intact, but built on an uneven foundation of information. SpongeBob believes the mystery has been solved. Patrick knows that the real secret remains exactly as hidden as it was before the entire episode started. Their friendship survives, the same way it survived the manipulated breakup shown in the previous episode, but this time it survives with an unresolved gap in what each of them actually knows about the situation they just went through together. This gap becomes especially interesting when considered alongside the friendship ring both characters wear as a symbol of their bond, a ring that opens to reveal a tiny musical scene celebrating their friendship. That ring represents an idealized, fully open version of their relationship, one built on complete trust and shared history. The events of this episode complicate that image slightly, showing a version of their friendship where at least one secret remains permanently unshared, hidden behind a string that SpongeBob will likely never think to pull again. Whether this small, unresolved secret ever causes any lasting damage to their friendship is left completely unaddressed by the show. The episode ends on Patrick's private laughter, and life in Bikini Bottom continues exactly as it always does, with no further mention of the box, the string, or the photograph in any episode that follows this one directly. For SpongeBob, the matter appears settled. For Patrick, and for the audience watching along, the truth remains something only one side of this friendship ever gets to know. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This episode raises an important question that later moments in the series would eventually answer. If a small, unexplained secret is enough to nearly end this friendship for a moment, at least until Patrick backs off from his own declaration, then a larger and more permanent kind of change to either character might not resolve quite so easily or so quickly. Section 5, Nature Pants, Season 1, 1999. Nature Pants aired during the very first season of the show, in 1999, making it one of the earliest episodes to explore what happens when the bond between SpongeBob and Patrick gets tested. Unlike Naughty Nautical Neighbors, this episode does not involve Squidward tricking anyone, and unlike The Secret Box, there is no privacy being violated or secret being protected. Instead, this episode builds its entire conflict around a much bigger decision, one that has nothing to do with an argument or a trick, and everything to do with SpongeBob choosing to leave the life he has always known. The episode opens at the Krusty Krab, where SpongeBob is working his usual shift as a fry cook. Rather than focusing on his job the way he normally does, SpongeBob finds himself daydreaming, imagining what it might be like to live among the jellyfish out in Jellyfish Fields, the open area just outside of Bikini Bottom, where wild jellyfish live, and where SpongeBob and Patrick often go jellyfishing for fun. In his daydream, SpongeBob imagines a simpler kind of life, one without the pressures of work, one where he could exist freely among creatures he already loves spending time with during his usual hobbies. While lost in this daydream, SpongeBob loses track of what he is actually doing at his job, and this lapse in attention causes him to accidentally start a fire in the kitchen. A fireman rushes in to handle the emergency, turning on a hose to put out the flames. SpongeBob, still not fully paying attention to his surroundings, ends up standing directly in the path of the water. The hose fills him up with water, and then, in a moment that plays into the show's frequent use of exaggerated cartoon physics, SpongeBob falls onto the fire himself. And being filled with water, he actually manages to put the fire out using his own body. After this chaotic scene, Mr. Krabs, who owns the Krusty Krab and depends on SpongeBob being focused and reliable at his job, asks him directly why he was not paying attention to his work. This question forces SpongeBob to explain what has been on his mind, and he tells Mr. Krabs that he wishes to live in the wild, away from his job and away from his usual daily routine. This is not a small comment made in passing. SpongeBob states this wish clearly enough that it becomes the driving decision of the entire episode, one that eventually leads him to actually quit his job and leave his home altogether. Following through completely on this wish, SpongeBob decides to move out of his pineapple and relocate to Jellyfish Fields, intending to live among the jellyfish exactly the way he imagined during his daydream at work. This decision represents a much bigger disruption to daily life in Bikini Bottom than anything explored in the previous 2 episodes covered so far. Squidward's trick in Naughty Nautical Neighbors caused a temporary rift built entirely on misunderstanding. Patrick's secret box created tension over one specific piece of hidden information. This time, SpongeBob is making an actual life decision, one that involves leaving behind his home, his job, and by extension, changing the shape of his everyday relationship with everyone close to him, including Patrick. Before leaving for Jellyfish Fields, SpongeBob begins giving away his belongings to the people around him, treating this move as something permanent rather than a short trip or a temporary experiment. Among the people he gives things to is Patrick, and the items he chooses to hand over carry a strange but oddly personal significance. He gives Patrick mayonnaise, a stash of old phone books, and his prized jellyfishing net, an item known throughout the show as Ol' Reliable. This net holds real meaning within the context of their friendship, since jellyfishing together stands as one of the most consistent shared activities between SpongeBob and Patrick throughout the entire series. Handing over this specific item signals that SpongeBob is not simply moving to a new location. He is giving up an entire part of the life he shared directly with his best friend. Patrick's reaction to receiving this net, along with the rest of SpongeBob's belongings, shows genuine sadness rather than confusion or indifference. Even though Patrick does not fully understand or agree with SpongeBob's decision to leave, he reacts with visible heartbreak while accepting these gifts, understanding on some level that this moment marks a real and significant change to his daily life. This reaction stands out because Patrick, throughout much of the series, tends to react to serious situations with a kind of relaxed or confused detachment. Here, his sadness feels immediate and sincere, showing just how much SpongeBob's decision affects him personally. Sandy Cheeks, the squirrel who lives in Bikini Bottom inside an air-filled dome called the Tree Dome, also reacts with shock upon hearing about SpongeBob's plans. She attempts to talk him out of this decision, expressing genuine concern over what SpongeBob is choosing to do. Despite her efforts, SpongeBob remains firm in his decision, declining her attempt to convince him to reconsider and stay. This detail shows that SpongeBob's choice to leave is not something made lightly or impulsively in a single moment. Even when directly challenged by someone who cares about him, he continues forward with the plan, treating it as something he genuinely wants, rather than something he might quickly regret and abandon. Before finally departing for Jellyfish Fields, SpongeBob says goodbye to all of his friends, treating the moment with the seriousness of someone leaving permanently, rather than someone stepping away for a short adventure. He even expresses hope that his friends might one day choose to join him in this new lifestyle, suggesting that he sees this decision not as a strange, isolated choice, but as something he genuinely believes could improve life for the people close to him as well, if only they were willing to try it themselves. In one of the episode's more memorable visual moments, SpongeBob removes his pants entirely before running off toward Jellyfish Fields, committing fully to the idea of abandoning his old life in favor of something closer to how the jellyfish themselves exist, without clothing or any of the trappings of his previous daily routine. This moment leaves Sandy and Squidward confused, unsure exactly why removing his pants specifically feels like a necessary part of this transition, though neither of them stops him or questions it any further before he runs off completely. Left standing together after SpongeBob's departure, Sandy and Squidward respond to the situation in very different ways, each placing a bet on how long they think SpongeBob will actually last living in the wild before giving up and returning home. Sandy predicts that SpongeBob will manage to survive out there for about a week before coming back. Squidward, showing far less confidence in SpongeBob's ability to handle this kind of lifestyle change, predicts he will last only about 11 minutes. This detail adds a layer of dark comedy to the episode, showing that neither of SpongeBob's friends genuinely expects this new lifestyle to succeed for very long, even while treating his departure as something real and significant enough to bet on. Patrick, however, does not join in with this kind of casual betting or light-hearted skepticism. Instead, as SpongeBob walks away completely, Patrick becomes visibly overwhelmed with sadness, reacting to the departure of his best friend with far more emotional weight than either Sandy or Squidward display at this moment. This reaction sets Patrick apart from the other two characters watching SpongeBob leave, showing that for him, this moment carries a different kind of importance, one rooted specifically in the loss of daily companionship with someone he considers his closest friend. Once SpongeBob arrives at Jellyfish Fields, he appears genuinely thrilled to finally be living the life he imagined during his earlier daydream. He rubs his hand gently against the sign marking the entrance to Jellyfish Fields, repeating to himself that he is finally home, treating the moment with a level of emotional significance that suggests this decision means far more to him than simply escaping a stressful day at work. For a brief period, SpongeBob seems fully committed to this new lifestyle, trying his best to fit in among the jellyfish and adjust to a completely different way of living. This attempt at fitting in does not go smoothly. SpongeBob tries interacting directly with the jellyfish, the same way he might interact with people back in Bikini Bottom, even introducing himself by a new name that fits his new identity, calling himself Jelly Bob, while trying to shake hands with one of the jellyfish. This attempt ends badly, since the jellyfish responds by stinging him, causing his hand to swell up significantly. Despite this painful reaction, SpongeBob continues trying to adjust to his new surroundings, sampling the food that jellyfish eat, and generally attempting to live according to their natural habits rather than his own. While SpongeBob struggles through his first experiences trying to live like a jellyfish, back in Bikini Bottom, Patrick is dealing with his own version of this separation. Rather than simply accepting SpongeBob's absence, Patrick decides to try convincing him to come home. He works together with Sandy, and the two of them set up a picnic near Jellyfish Fields, hoping that a familiar and enjoyable activity might be enough to lure SpongeBob back to his old life. Sandy brings along Krabby Patties, the food item SpongeBob loves most and eats regularly at his job, hoping that offering this specific food might be tempting enough to break through his commitment to his new lifestyle. Despite this effort, SpongeBob resists the temptation entirely, remaining firm in his decision to stay with the jellyfish rather than return to his old life, even when presented with one of his favorite foods and the company of two people who clearly miss him. This resistance shows just how seriously SpongeBob is treating this experiment in living differently, refusing to give in even when faced with something as immediately appealing as a Krabby Patty shared with close friends. For Patrick, watching this rejection happen firsthand appears to push him past simple sadness and into something closer to genuine desperation. Rather than accepting that SpongeBob might actually want this new lifestyle and giving up on trying to bring him home, Patrick's emotional state shifts into something the show portrays as increasingly unstable. He becomes what the episode itself describes as crazed and heartbroken, no longer simply sad about losing his best friend's daily company, but actively distressed, to the point where his usual easygoing personality starts to break down entirely. This shift in Patrick's behavior leads him to make a decision that stands out as one of the more unusual and intense moments in the entire episode. Rather than continuing to try convincing SpongeBob through kindness or shared meals, Patrick decides instead to physically hunt him down using the very jellyfishing net SpongeBob gave him earlier as a farewell gift. Armed with Ol' Reliable, the same net that once symbolized their shared hobby of jellyfishing together, Patrick begins actively chasing SpongeBob through jellyfish fields, no longer trying to talk him into coming home, but attempting instead to physically capture him and force his return. Patrick's stated intention during this chase becomes especially unsettling when compared to his usual character throughout the rest of the show. He declares that since SpongeBob refuses to come home on his own, Patrick intends to capture him and keep him as a kind of trophy instead. To support this plan, Patrick has even prepared a specific container meant to hold SpongeBob once captured, going so far as to label a jar with the words "SpongeBob Friend" written across it, apparently intending to keep his best friend contained and displayed rather than accept that he might actually choose to live somewhere else permanently. This entire sequence plays out with a strange mixture of genuine emotional pain and exaggerated cartoon comedy, a combination the show uses often throughout its run. Patrick's heartbreak over losing his best friend's company feels real within the context of the episode, yet the specific way this heartbreak expresses itself, through hunting SpongeBob with a net and preparing a labeled jar to keep him in, stays firmly within the realm of cartoon logic rather than anything meant to be taken with complete seriousness. Still, underneath the comedic execution, the underlying emotional core of the sequence remains genuine. Patrick is not simply behaving strangely for the sake of humor. He is reacting, in his own exaggerated way, to something that feels like a real loss to him. SpongeBob, now being actively chased through jellyfish fields by his former best friend wielding a net, tries desperately to convince Patrick to stop and return home on his own, attempting to talk him down the same way Sandy and Patrick had earlier tried to talk SpongeBob into abandoning his new lifestyle. Despite these efforts, Patrick continues the chase, driven by his own emotional state rather than by anything SpongeBob says to try calming him down. SpongeBob attempts to escape by hiding in various places throughout jellyfish fields, at one point trying to conceal himself behind a passing snail's shell, only for the snail to slither away and leave him exposed again. He then attempts to hide behind a rock, and later behind a bush, but Patrick, despite his usual reputation for being easily confused or distracted, manages to spot him each time, refusing to give up the chase. Eventually, SpongeBob finds a way to escape Patrick's pursuit entirely by jumping directly into a jellyfish hive, a location that puts him out of Patrick's reach, since Patrick cannot follow him inside. Patrick attempts to bring the hive down using the net, trying multiple times to force SpongeBob out of his hiding place, but none of these attempts succeed. Eventually, faced with the reality that he cannot reach SpongeBob no matter how hard he tries, Patrick gives up the chase entirely. In a moment that captures the emotional weight underlying this entire sequence, Patrick breaks the net in half rather than simply putting it down, a physical gesture that suggests he is not just ending the chase, but giving up on the idea of forcing SpongeBob to come home altogether. He then leaves the area, visibly sad, walking away without the friend he came looking for. This moment marks the emotional low point of the episode for Patrick specifically. Having tried everything he could think of, from a friendly picnic to an increasingly desperate physical chase, Patrick ultimately accepts defeat and walks away, apparently resigned to the idea that SpongeBob might genuinely be gone for good, choosing a new life among the jellyfish over his old life and old friendships back in Bikini Bottom. For SpongeBob, however, this victory over Patrick's pursuit does not come without consequences of its own. Shortly after entering the jellyfish hive, the jellyfish who actually live there return, and rather than welcoming SpongeBob as one of their own, the way he hoped, they sting him and chase him away from the hive entirely. This detail becomes an important turning point in SpongeBob's own experience trying to live as a jellyfish. Despite his enthusiasm and his genuine effort to fit into this new lifestyle, the jellyfish themselves ultimately reject him, treating him as an intruder rather than accepting him as one of their own community members. Following this rejection, SpongeBob's experience living in the wild continues to deteriorate. He finds himself sleeping through cold, uncomfortable nights, a stark contrast to the warm and comfortable pineapple home he left behind. He struggles with poor food options available to him living among the jellyfish, nothing close to the kind of meals he enjoyed regularly back at the Krusty Krab. On top of these struggles, he also has to deal with poisoned sea urchins that end up clinging to his body, causing him physical discomfort that adds yet another layer of difficulty to his attempt at living this simpler, more natural lifestyle. Faced with these mounting hardships, and after the earlier rejection from the very jellyfish he hoped to live alongside, SpongeBob begins to reconsider the decision that started this entire episode. The daydream he had while working at the Krusty Krab, the one that imagined a simple, carefree life among the jellyfish, does not match the difficult, uncomfortable reality he actually experiences once he commits to that lifestyle completely. Feeling increasingly regretful about the choice he made, SpongeBob eventually decides to walk back home in the middle of the night, giving up on his attempt to live in jellyfish fields permanently. When SpongeBob arrives back home, he receives an unexpected surprise. Rather than facing disappointment or frustration from his friends over abandoning his plan so quickly, he instead finds Patrick, along with Squidward, Mr. Krabs, Sandy, and his pet snail Gary, waiting for him with a welcome home party already prepared. This detail shows that despite Patrick's earlier desperate and increasingly unstable attempts to force SpongeBob to return home, once SpongeBob actually does come back on his own, none of that earlier tension carries forward into anger or resentment. Instead, Patrick and the rest of SpongeBob's friends greet his return with celebration, genuinely happy to have him back among them. Feeling relieved and glad to be home again, SpongeBob takes back his job at the Krusty Krab and puts his pants back on, symbolically returning fully to the life and identity he had before deciding to leave for Jellyfish Fields. In a final gesture that closes out the episode on a warm note, everyone gathers together in a group hug to celebrate his return. This group hug, however, comes with an unexpectedly uncomfortable side effect, since SpongeBob still has poisoned sea urchins stuck to parts of his body from his time living in the wild, and through the hug, everyone participating ends up receiving some of those same poison urchins themselves. This final detail keeps the episode consistent with the overall tone the show maintains throughout the entire sequence, blending genuine emotional moments such as Patrick's heartbreak and the eventual happy reunion with exaggerated physical comedy that undercuts any risk of the episode feeling overly serious or sentimental. Even in a moment meant to represent warmth and relief after a significant separation, the show finds a way to insert a small piece of slapstick humor, keeping the emotional weight of the episode balanced against its identity as a comedy aimed at a wide audience. Looking at this episode as a whole, the conflict between SpongeBob and Patrick takes on a completely different shape compared to the two episodes covered earlier in this look at their friendship. There is no trick played by an outside party, and there is no private secret being protected by either character. Instead, the entire situation stems from SpongeBob making a genuine, independent decision about how he wants to live his life. A decision that happens to conflict directly with his existing friendship and daily routine with Patrick. This shifts the entire nature of what almost breaks their bond in this particular episode. Rather than a misunderstanding or a boundary being crossed, the tension here comes from something closer to change itself, and how difficult that change becomes for the person left behind. Patrick does not do anything wrong throughout this episode, and neither does SpongeBob in any direct sense either. SpongeBob is simply pursuing something he genuinely wants, and Patrick is simply struggling to cope with the sudden absence of someone central to his daily life. Neither side is at fault, yet the situation still pushes their relationship to genuine emotional extremes, culminating in an actual physical chase driven by real heartbreak on Patrick's side. This episode also introduces an idea that becomes relevant again later when looking at other moments where SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship gets tested. Change, even change that does not involve any argument or any broken trust, still has the power to genuinely threaten the stability of their bond. SpongeBob does not need to say anything hurtful to Patrick, and Patrick does not need to do anything wrong towards SpongeBob for their friendship to end up tested this seriously. Simply wanting something different out of life, something that does not include the same daily routine they have always shared together, proves to be enough to push their relationship into genuinely uncertain territory. The episode ultimately resolves through SpongeBob's own realization that the lifestyle he imagined does not match reality, rather than through any direct conversation or resolution between him and Patrick regarding the chase or the emotional distress that led to it. Once SpongeBob returns, the earlier tension simply dissolves into celebration, without either character stopping to discuss what happened or how close things came to a much darker outcome during the chase through Jellyfish Fields. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This pattern, a friendship tested by something deeply personal, followed by a resolution that arrives without much direct conversation about what actually happened, echoes a detail already seen once before in this look at their relationship. It raises the question of what happens the next time change comes not from SpongeBob choosing to leave, but from something altering one of them on the inside instead. Something neither of them can simply walk away from and decide to abandon once reality sets in. Section 6. Patrick Smartpants, Season 4, 2006. Patrick Smartpants aired during the 4th season of the show in 2006, and it introduced a different kind of threat to SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship than anything explored in the earlier episodes covered so far. This time, the problem does not come from an outside trick, a private secret, or a personal choice to leave home. Instead, it comes from something changing inside Patrick himself. A shift that alters who he is on a basic level, and in doing so, changes what he and SpongeBob can actually share together. The episode begins with an accident. Patrick, going about his usual routine, ends up getting stung by a jellyfish spike, an object connected to the jellyfish that live in the fields just outside Bikini Bottom. This kind of sting is not something the show treats as an everyday occurrence, and it quickly becomes clear that this particular sting affects Patrick in a way that ordinary encounters with jellyfish never have before. Rather than causing him pain or a simple physical reaction, the sting somehow raises his intelligence dramatically, transforming him from someone known throughout the series for being slow and simple-minded into someone suddenly capable of understanding complicated ideas with ease. This transformation does not happen gradually. Patrick's new intelligence appears almost immediately after the sting, and the difference in how he thinks and speaks becomes obvious right away to everyone around him. Where Patrick once struggled with basic logic and often misunderstood simple instructions, he now begins using complex reasoning, sophisticated vocabulary, and forms of thinking that nobody in his life, especially SpongeBob, has ever seen him display before. This sudden shift catches everyone off guard, since nothing about Patrick's usual personality suggested this kind of change was even possible. For SpongeBob, this transformation creates an immediate and painful problem. The two of them have spent years building their friendship around specific shared activities, most of which rely on a certain simplicity and lack of overthinking. Jellyfishing, blowing bubbles, inventing silly games, and generally enjoying carefree afternoons together have always formed the foundation of their bond. None of these activities require intelligence in the way Patrick has suddenly gained it. And in fact, part of what made them enjoyable in the first place was how uncomplicated they were. SpongeBob tries to continue this pattern, suggesting the same kinds of activities they have always done together, hoping that Patrick's new intelligence will not change how much he enjoys spending time with his best friend. This hope does not hold up. Patrick, now thinking on a completely different level than before, can no longer find any enjoyment in the simple activities that once defined his friendship with SpongeBob. Where jellyfishing or blowing bubbles once brought him genuine happiness, his new intelligence makes these same activities feel dull and unsatisfying to him. He is simply too smart now to see the appeal in the kind of carefree, uncomplicated fun that made up the bulk of his life before the jellyfish sting changed him. Faced with this loss of shared interest, Patrick makes a decision that mirrors, in a much more permanent way, the kind of declaration seen earlier in the secret box. He officially ends his friendship with SpongeBob. Unlike Patrick's earlier declaration in the secret box, which he reversed within seconds once his anger passed, this decision carries much more weight and lasts far longer throughout the episode. Patrick is not reacting out of a temporary burst of frustration this time. He is making a considered decision based on the reality that he and SpongeBob simply no longer have anything in common to build a friendship around. This moment lands hard for SpongeBob, specifically because there is no trick to uncover and no misunderstanding to clear up. Patrick is not confused about anything, and nobody has manipulated the situation the way Squidward once did. The friendship is ending because Patrick has genuinely changed, and that change has made the two of them incompatible in a way that did not exist before the sting. SpongeBob, described in the source material as losing his best friend, experiences this loss as something real and permanent feeling, at least for as long as Patrick's transformation lasts. Struggling to process this sudden and painful change, SpongeBob turns to Sandy Cheeks for help, hoping that she might be able to offer some kind of advice or solution to his situation. Sandy, being an intelligent and scientifically minded squirrel who has always valued knowledge and learning, seems like a reasonable person for SpongeBob to approach, given the nature of his problem. Instead of finding comfort or a solution through this conversation, SpongeBob ends up feeling even worse than before. This happens because Patrick, now equipped with an intelligence level closer to Sandy's own, begins spending time with her instead of with SpongeBob. The two of them bond over their shared ability to understand complex ideas, something SpongeBob cannot participate in no matter how much he wants to be included. Watching Patrick and Sandy interact easily, discussing topics on a level SpongeBob simply cannot follow, deepens his sadness rather than helping him find a way to fix the situation. He came to Sandy hoping for support, and instead he finds himself watching his best friend build a new connection with someone else, one based entirely on something SpongeBob does not have access to. This detail introduces a level of jealousy and isolation into the episode that goes beyond simple sadness over losing a friend. SpongeBob is not just missing Patrick's company, he is watching Patrick replace him, at least temporarily, with someone who can offer him something SpongeBob cannot. This creates a much more personal and painful version of loss than anything shown in the earlier episodes, since this time, the separation comes with a visible reminder of exactly what SpongeBob is missing out on and exactly why. However, this new bond between Patrick and Sandy does not last very long, or remain stable for long either. Patrick's transformed personality, while intelligent, also comes with a new attitude that creates problems in his interactions with Sandy as well. Despite their shared ability to think and speak on a more advanced level, Patrick begins treating Sandy poorly, at one point calling her dumb during one of their conversations. This comment upsets Sandy considerably, especially given that her own intelligence and scientific mind have always been a central part of her identity throughout the series. Being insulted this way by someone she was just beginning to connect with on an intellectual level causes a rift between them as well. Sandy's reaction to this insult reveals something important about how the show frames Patrick's transformation overall. Rather than presenting his new intelligence purely as an improvement, the episode shows that this change also brings out a colder, more conceited side of his personality, one that was never present when he was simply the easygoing, lovable, and somewhat oblivious character everyone already knew. Sandy, upset by this new arrogance, expresses a wish that the old version of Patrick, the one she now describes as idiotic but nice, would come back instead of this new, smarter, but far less pleasant version of him. This detail is significant because it shows that the problems caused by Patrick's transformation extend beyond just his friendship with SpongeBob. Sandy, someone who genuinely values intelligence and who might reasonably be expected to enjoy having someone new to talk to on her level, ends up preferring the earlier version of Patrick, despite his lack of intelligence, simply because that earlier version came with a kindness and warmth that his newly intelligent self no longer seems to carry. This suggests that whatever Patrick gained through the jellyfish sting, he lost something else in exchange, something that mattered more to the people around him than raw intelligence ever could. With his relationship with Sandy now damaged as well, Patrick finds himself in an increasingly isolated position as the episode continues. He has already ended his friendship with SpongeBob, deciding that his new intelligence makes their old bond impossible to maintain. Now, his attempt to replace that friendship with a new connection to Sandy has also fallen apart. This time, because of his own behavior, rather than because of any real incompatibility between them. Squidward, who has never particularly enjoyed spending time with Patrick under any circumstances, offers no alternative either, since Patrick's new personality does not fit well with him either. This leaves Patrick without any close companionship at all, a stark contrast to the version of his life shown at the start of the episode, when he had SpongeBob as a constant, reliable best friend by his side. His newfound intelligence, rather than improving his life or opening up new opportunities for connection, has instead left him too complicated for SpongeBob, too unpleasant for Sandy, and simply unwelcome around Squidward the same as always. The episode frames this isolation clearly, describing Patrick at this point as having become a loner, someone too far removed from his old simple personality to fit back in with SpongeBob, yet too arrogant and difficult in his new intelligent state to build lasting connections with anyone else either. Meanwhile, SpongeBob experiences his own version of this same loneliness. Having lost his best friend to a transformation he cannot understand or participate in, and having watched that same friend briefly bond with someone else before that connection also fell apart, SpongeBob finds himself without the daily companionship that has defined so much of his life throughout the series. Both characters, despite no longer being friends with each other, and despite Patrick's attempt to find companionship elsewhere, end up isolated and unhappy on their own, each dealing separately with the emotional weight of a friendship that no longer functions the way it once did. This mirrored isolation becomes an important detail in how the episode builds toward its eventual resolution. Rather than showing one character moving on happily while the other suffers, the show presents both SpongeBob and Patrick as equally affected by the breakdown of their friendship, each of them sulking on his own during the night, unable to find comfort in anything else that might normally distract them from this loss. This detail reinforces just how central their friendship has always been to both of their daily lives, showing that even Patrick, now operating on a completely different intellectual level, still feels the absence of SpongeBob's company, despite believing that their old activities no longer hold any appeal for him. Eventually, this shared unhappiness reaches a point where Patrick decides he can no longer continue living this way. Despite his new intelligence, and despite his earlier conviction that he and SpongeBob no longer have anything in common worth maintaining a friendship over, Patrick reaches a moment where he becomes tired of the isolation his transformation has created. He decides to try to fix the situation by attempting to hang out with SpongeBob again, choosing to make an effort toward reconciliation rather than continuing to accept the lonely, disconnected life his new intelligence has left him with. This decision marks an important shift in how Patrick approaches the situation compared to earlier in the episode. Where he once ended the friendship decisively, treating his new intelligence as a permanent and unchangeable obstacle to spending time with SpongeBob the way they used to, he now appears willing to try again, suggesting that whatever satisfaction his intelligence brought him initially has not been enough to make up for the loss of his closest friendship. The two of them attempt to go jellyfishing together again, returning to the exact activity that once defined their friendship before Patrick's transformation made it feel impossible to enjoy. This attempt to return to their old routine represents Patrick trying to bridge the gap that his transformation created, testing whether any part of his old friendship with SpongeBob can still survive despite everything that has changed about how his mind works. Whether this specific attempt succeeds smoothly or continues to highlight the differences between who Patrick used to be and who he has become due to the jellyfish sting reflects the core tension the entire episode has been building toward from the very beginning. Looking at this episode as a whole, it introduces a version of conflict between SpongeBob and Patrick that feels different from anything covered in the earlier sections of this look at their relationship. There is no outside manipulation at play, the way there was with Squidward's bubble trick. There is no private secret being guarded, the way there was with the hidden box. There is not even a voluntary choice to leave, the way there was when SpongeBob decided to move to Jellyfish Fields on his own. Instead, this episode explores something much harder to control or reverse through simple willpower or apology. A fundamental change to who Patrick is as a person, caused by something entirely outside of anyone's control. This kind of change raises questions that the earlier episodes never really had to address directly. A trick can be uncovered and explained. A secret can eventually be revealed or forgiven. A choice to leave can be reversed once someone realizes the new lifestyle does not suit them the way they hoped. But a fundamental shift in someone's personality and way of thinking cannot be undone through any of those same methods. SpongeBob cannot simply explain his way past Patrick's new intelligence, And Patrick cannot simply choose to enjoy simple activities again if his new way of thinking genuinely makes them feel dull and unsatisfying to him. This episode also introduces a level of jealousy into SpongeBob and Patrick's story that did not exist in the previous episodes covered so far. Watching Patrick connect with Sandy instead of him adds an emotional layer beyond simple sadness over losing a friend, since SpongeBob now has to confront the reality that his best friend might be capable of building meaningful connections with other people, connections that do not include him specifically. This detail complicates the uncomplicated nature of SpongeBob and Patrick's usual friendship, showing that their bond, while strong, is not necessarily unique or irreplaceable from Patrick's side, at least not while he remains under the influence of his transformed intelligence. At the same time, Sandy's rejection of Patrick's new, arrogant personality offers an important piece of perspective on the entire situation. It shows that Patrick's transformation is not simply an upgrade that makes him better in every way. His new intelligence comes paired with a coldness and conceit that actively damages his ability to connect with people, even those who might otherwise be expected to appreciate his newfound ability to think and communicate on a higher level. This detail suggests that whatever SpongeBob is losing through Patrick's transformation, and whatever loneliness Patrick experiences as a result of his own choices during this period, the change itself has cost Patrick something valuable as well, something tied closely to the warmth and kindness that made him such a good friend to SpongeBob in the first place. The image of both characters sulking separately at night, unable to find comfort despite Patrick's supposed upgrade in intelligence, and despite whatever independence SpongeBob might try to find on his own, captures the emotional core of this particular test to their friendship. Unlike a misunderstanding that can be cleared up through information, or a boundary that simply needs to be respected going forward, this situation asks whether two people who have grown apart due to circumstances completely outside their control can still find a way back to each other, or whether some kinds of change end up being too significant to overcome, no matter how much either person might want things to go back to the way they were before. Patrick's decision to try hanging out with SpongeBob again, despite his earlier certainty that their friendship could not survive his transformation, suggests that even a fundamental change to someone's personality does not necessarily erase the value that person places on their closest relationships. Whether intelligence, arrogance, and a completely different way of thinking can coexist with the same easy, uncomplicated friendship SpongeBob and Patrick built over years together becomes the central question this episode leaves open as it moves toward its conclusion. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This question, whether change on this level can truly be undone, or whether some part of what made their friendship work gets permanently altered once someone becomes fundamentally different, carries forward into how their bond gets tested in other ways throughout the rest of the series. Section 7. The Battle of Bikini Bottom, Season 5. The Battle of Bikini Bottom takes a very different path toward conflict compared to every episode covered so far. This time, there is no outside trick, no private secret, no life-changing decision, and no physical transformation to blame. Instead, the entire disagreement grows out of something as small as a shopping trip and a piece of local history that neither character fully understands at the start of the episode. The episode begins at the Bikini Bottom Mall, where SpongeBob and Patrick are trying on matching shirts that say, "Best Friend," with an arrow printed on each one pointing toward the other person. The idea behind these shirts seems simple enough. When SpongeBob and Patrick stand next to each other the correct way, the arrows point at one another, showing everyone around them exactly who their best friend is. The problem starts almost immediately, since the moment either of them turns to face a different direction, the arrows end up pointing somewhere else entirely, sending out what the show describes as the wrong signals to anyone watching. This mix-up over the shirts causes enough confusion and disruption inside the mall that security guards eventually step in and remove both of them from the building. Being kicked out for something as harmless as a poorly designed shirt fits perfectly with the kind of trouble SpongeBob and Patrick tend to cause without ever meaning any harm. Rather than being upset about getting thrown out, the two of them simply move on, searching for something else that might work better as a symbol of their friendship. During this search, they come across a group of bikini-bottom citizens dressed in old-fashioned military uniforms. SpongeBob and Patrick, not understanding what these citizens are actually doing, assume the uniforms are simply another kind of matching outfit, similar in spirit to the shirts they were just wearing. What they do not realize is that these citizens are actually taking part in a historical reenactment, a planned recreation of a real event from the town's past, known as the Battle of Bikini Bottom. When SpongeBob admits that he has never heard of this historical event, Patrick steps in to explain it to him. However, Patrick's explanation of the battle comes across as inaccurate and exaggerated, describing the conflict in a way that makes it sound as though he personally took part in it himself, despite the fact that this event clearly happened long before either of them existed. Patrick describes the battle as having been fought between two opposing groups. One side, according to Patrick, consisted of citizens who were extremely focused on personal cleanliness and hygiene. The other side consisted of citizens who had no interest in cleanliness at all, and were perfectly comfortable living in dirt and mess. This explanation, delivered with total confidence despite its clear inaccuracies, becomes the spark that lights the entire conflict of the episode. SpongeBob, upon hearing that Patrick sympathizes with the dirty side of this historical divide, reacts with genuine disgust. This reaction reveals something SpongeBob apparently never fully considered before this moment, that Patrick holds a real, personal preference for mess and dirtiness over cleanliness, a preference SpongeBob finds deeply unpleasant once he becomes aware of it. Looking back over their history together, SpongeBob realizes he had not noticed this difference in values earlier, despite having shared meals and activities with Patrick many times before. He recalls moments such as getting ice cream together, or eating Krabby Patties at a restaurant called Fancy. Activities where this disagreement over cleanliness never became an issue or even came up in conversation. This detail adds an interesting layer to the argument, showing that the disagreement was not something new between them, but something that had simply never surfaced clearly enough before this specific moment at the historical reenactment to cause any real friction. Once the disagreement becomes clear, SpongeBob and Patrick begin arguing directly, each one defending his own side of the cleanliness divide. Their argument grows loud and disruptive enough that it interferes with the actual reenactment taking place around them, annoying the citizens who are trying to recreate the real historical battle in a respectful and organized way. Rather than stepping back and lowering the volume of their disagreement out of respect for the event around them, SpongeBob and Patrick instead lean further into the conflict, deciding to stage their own version of the battle based entirely on Patrick's inaccurate description of what the original event was actually about. This decision leads the two of them to grab uniforms of their own and begin acting out this imagined war between the clean and the dirty, a conflict that exists mostly in Patrick's exaggerated retelling rather than in any real historical account. Their reenactment quickly becomes chaotic enough that it drives away the actual citizens who had been peacefully recreating the real event, leaving SpongeBob and Patrick alone to carry out their own increasingly intense version of the disagreement. What started as a simple misunderstanding about a piece of local history now escalates into a full-scale battle between the two of them, with SpongeBob attempting to convince Patrick of the value of cleanliness, while Patrick works just as hard to defile SpongeBob's own sense of cleanliness and order. Neither side backs down, and the disagreement moves from words into physical action, with each of them using increasingly extreme tactics to prove his side of the argument. At one point during this escalating conflict, Patrick begins chasing SpongeBob while holding a piece of dried mucus, using it as a kind of weapon meant to disgust and provoke him further. This chase eventually leads them both into the Krusty Krab, the very restaurant where SpongeBob works and takes considerable pride in following rules and maintaining order. Once inside, Patrick manages to corner SpongeBob within the kitchen area, trapping him in the middle of the very same workplace SpongeBob normally treats with careful attention and respect. This entire sequence highlights something important about how differently SpongeBob and Patrick approach the world. A difference that had always existed between them, but rarely became this obvious or this disruptive before this specific episode. SpongeBob values structure, cleanliness, and doing things properly, values reflected clearly in how seriously he takes his job and how much pride he shows in small details like a clean grill or a properly maintained spatula. Patrick, by contrast, shows a genuine comfort with mess and disorder, a preference that fits his general approach to life throughout the series, where very little seems to bother him and even fewer things seem to require any real effort or care on his part. The disagreement in this episode, unlike the more emotional and personal conflicts explored in earlier sections, grows out of something closer to a genuine difference in personal values between the two of them. There is no trick being played against them, no secret being kept from one another, and no life-altering decision or physical transformation driving the conflict. Instead, the entire fight stems from something as ordinary as discovering that your best friend holds a personal preference you find genuinely unpleasant, and then allowing that discovery to spiral into something far larger than it probably needed to become. This episode raises an interesting point about how much SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship depends on avoiding certain topics rather than actually agreeing on everything important to each of them. For years, apparently, this specific disagreement about cleanliness versus mess never came up in a way serious enough to cause any real friction between them. It takes a chance encounter with a historical reenactment, combined with Patrick's tendency to explain things inaccurately and with total confidence, to finally bring this underlying difference out into the open, where it can no longer be ignored or avoided. Once brought out into the open, the disagreement escalates far beyond what its original cause probably warranted. A simple difference of personal preference, something that could likely be set aside without much trouble under calmer circumstances, instead turns into a full-scale mock battle, complete with costumes, chasing, and eventually a physical confrontation inside SpongeBob's own workplace. This escalation shows how quickly SpongeBob and Patrick tend to take things to extremes once a disagreement actually takes hold between them. A pattern that shows up in different forms throughout many of the episodes explored so far in this look at their friendship. At the same time, this episode differs from the earlier ones covered in this look at their relationship in one important way. There is no clear moment where either SpongeBob or Patrick declares the friendship over, the way Patrick did in The Secret Box, or the way both of them did together in Naughty Nautical Neighbors. Instead, this conflict plays out as an ongoing battle of values and preferences, one that escalates steadily rather than arriving at a single dramatic breaking point. This gives the episode a slightly different shape compared to the others, showing that not every serious disagreement between SpongeBob and Patrick needs to include an actual declaration that their friendship has ended in order to still represent a real and meaningful test of their bond. The setting of this conflict also adds something worth noticing. Rather than taking place somewhere neutral, the disagreement moves directly into the Krusty Krab, the location most closely tied to SpongeBob's sense of pride, structure, and personal identity throughout the entire series. Patrick cornering SpongeBob inside this specific location, using dried mucus as part of an ongoing battle over cleanliness, represents a kind of invasion into the one place SpongeBob treats with the most care and seriousness in his daily life. This detail intensifies the conflict beyond what it might have felt like if the same disagreement had played out somewhere less personally significant to SpongeBob. Looking closely at the root of this entire disagreement also reveals something slightly ironic about how it started in the first place. The whole conflict grows out of Patrick's inaccurate explanation of a historical event he clearly did not understand correctly, yet neither he nor SpongeBob stops to question whether his version of events might simply be wrong before allowing it to define an entire afternoon of arguing and physical confrontation. Rather than pausing to consider that Patrick might have gotten the history wrong, both of them accept his explanation completely and build an entire battle around it, treating an inaccurate retelling of local history as though it perfectly captures a real and meaningful difference between them. This willingness to accept Patrick's flawed explanation without question, and then act on it so intensely, says something about how quickly small misunderstandings can grow into much larger conflicts when neither person involved takes a moment to slow down and check whether the information driving their disagreement is even accurate to begin with. Just as Squidward's fake insult bubbles were accepted without question back in Naughty Nautical Neighbors, Patrick's inaccurate history lesson here gets treated as solid enough ground to build an entire battle upon, showing a recurring pattern where SpongeBob and Patrick's conflicts often grow from shaky foundations that neither of them thinks to examine closely before reacting. This episode leaves open the exact way the conflict eventually settles between them, focusing instead on how far a disagreement over something as small as cleanliness preferences can escalate once both parties commit fully to their side of the argument. Whether their friendship needs an actual apology to recover this time, or whether things settle back to normal the same quiet way they often do after other conflicts throughout the series, remains a detail worth exploring further. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What stays clear from this episode is that even something as ordinary as a personal preference, something that never caused a problem across years of friendship, can turn into a real battle once the right spark brings it out into the open at exactly the wrong moment. Section 8. You Don't Know Sponge. Season 7, 2010. You Don't Know Sponge aired during Season 7 of the show in 2010, and it approached the friendship between SpongeBob and Patrick from an angle none of the earlier episodes had tried before. Rather than building conflict around a trick, a secret, a life decision, a physical change, or a clash of personal values, this episode builds its entire test around a simple question. How well do these two best friends actually know each other? The episode begins at the Krusty Krab, where SpongeBob and Patrick are making their favorite noises, sounds each of them associates with something they love. SpongeBob makes the sound of a laughing dolphin, while Patrick makes a noise meant to copy the song of a great blue whale. Both of them repeat these sounds enthusiastically, clearly enjoying themselves, while Squidward, working nearby, becomes increasingly annoyed by the constant noise. Eventually, Squidward asks them directly what exactly they are doing, unable to ignore the strange sounds any longer. SpongeBob and Patrick explain that they are following instructions from a magazine called Simpleton, a publication they have been using as a source for various activities to do together. While flipping through this magazine, they come across a specific feature, a quiz designed to test how much two friends actually know about each other. Curious and excited by the idea, the two of them decide to take this quiz together, treating it as just another fun activity to share, similar to countless other games and challenges they have invented or borrowed over the years. At first, this quiz seems like nothing more than a lighthearted way for two best friends to prove how close they are. Given everything already established about their friendship throughout the series, including matching rings, shared history, and years of daily companionship, there is no reason for either of them to expect anything other than an easy, confidence-boosting experience. Neither of them treats the quiz with much seriousness at the start, assuming it will simply confirm what they already believe about how well they know one another. The results of the quiz tell a very different story. SpongeBob performs extremely well, answering questions about Patrick correctly and showing that he has paid close attention to details about his best friend's life, habits, and preferences. Patrick, however, performs badly, struggling to answer even the simplest questions about SpongeBob correctly. This gap between the two scores becomes impossible to ignore once the quiz results are revealed, exposing a clear and uneven difference in how much each of them actually knows about the other. This detail carries real weight within the context of everything already understood about their friendship. Throughout the series, SpongeBob and Patrick are shown spending an enormous amount of time together, sharing meals, activities, and daily routines in a way that would normally suggest deep mutual understanding between them. The quiz results challenge this assumption directly, showing that despite all the time spent together, the depth of knowledge between them is far from equal. SpongeBob has clearly been paying attention in ways that Patrick has not, at least according to what this specific quiz measures. Reacting to this outcome, Patrick delivers a line that captures the sting of the moment directly. He remarks that it looks like his best friend is not actually a friend at all, framing the failed quiz result as evidence of a deeper problem in their relationship, rather than simply a fun activity that did not go his way. This reaction turns what began as a lighthearted game into something with real emotional consequences, suggesting that Patrick genuinely feels troubled by discovering how little he seems to know about someone he considers his closest friend. This moment stands out compared to earlier tests of their friendship covered in previous sections. In Naughty Nautical Neighbors, the conflict came entirely from outside manipulation, with neither SpongeBob nor Patrick actually at fault for anything that happened between them. In The Secret Box, SpongeBob crossed a boundary Patrick had clearly set, creating a conflict rooted in one specific action. In Patrick's Smart Pants, an outside force beyond anyone's control changed who Patrick fundamentally was as a person. Here, in You Don't Know Sponge, the conflict comes from something quieter and, in some ways, more unsettling. A simple quiz reveals a gap in understanding that had apparently existed the entire time, hidden beneath years of daily companionship that everyone, including the characters themselves, assumed meant deep mutual knowledge. Following this uncomfortable realization, the episode shifts into a smaller, almost separate moment that adds another layer to Patrick's reaction. Rather than immediately trying to fix the situation or make up for his poor quiz performance, Patrick goes to buy ice cream, purchasing 2 cones but only getting his own favorite flavor for himself, described as a combination of dill pickle swirl mixed with mustard and extra bacon bits. After buying this treat for himself, Patrick then turns to SpongeBob and asks him for money, apparently expecting SpongeBob to cover the cost, despite the awkward tension the quiz results just created between them. This small detail adds a layer of complexity to the emotional weight of the episode. Just moments after expressing genuine hurt over discovering how little he seems to know about SpongeBob, Patrick still turns to him for something as simple and practical as covering the cost of ice cream, treating their friendship as something that continues functioning normally even in the middle of an emotional disagreement. This detail fits a pattern already noticed in earlier episodes covered in this look at their relationship, where SpongeBob and Patrick's disagreements rarely stop the basic mechanics of their daily friendship from continuing forward, even while deeper emotional issues remain unresolved underneath the surface. Looking closely at what this episode reveals about their friendship overall, the quiz results raise an interesting question about how friendship gets measured in the first place. SpongeBob clearly pays close attention to details about Patrick's life, remembering things well enough to answer questions about him correctly and consistently throughout the quiz. Patrick, despite spending just as much time around SpongeBob, does not seem to retain the same kind of detailed knowledge about his best friend's habits, preferences, or personal information. This imbalance does not necessarily mean that Patrick cares less about SpongeBob than SpongeBob cares about him. Throughout the rest of the series, Patrick consistently shows genuine affection, loyalty, and concern for SpongeBob in countless other situations, reacting with real sadness during SpongeBob's departure in Nature Pants, and showing real happiness whenever their friendship gets confirmed or celebrated in other episodes. What this quiz suggests instead is that the way each of them experiences and processes their friendship differs significantly, with SpongeBob perhaps naturally paying closer attention to specific facts and details, while Patrick experiences the friendship in a more general, less detail-oriented way, without this difference necessarily reflecting how much either of them actually values the relationship itself. Still, in the moment, this distinction does not soften the blow for Patrick. His reaction, describing SpongeBob as not actually being a friend based on the quiz results, shows that he interprets this gap in knowledge as something meaningful and troubling, at least immediately after discovering it. This reaction highlights how a simple, almost silly activity, something as lighthearted as a quiz found in a magazine, can end up exposing something real and uncomfortable about a relationship that both people involved had always assumed was built on deep and complete mutual understanding. This episode also stands apart from earlier ones because the conflict here does not involve any clear resolution shown within the material already covered. Unlike Naughty Nautical Neighbors, where the friendship gets fully repaired by the end through an accidental shared laugh, or Nature Pants, where SpongeBob's return home naturally dissolves the earlier tension, You Don't Know Sponge leaves the emotional weight of the quiz results somewhat unresolved within the portion of the story already explored. Patrick's comment about SpongeBob not truly being a friend hangs in the air, followed immediately by an ordinary request for ice cream money, blending genuine hurt with everyday normalcy in a way that leaves the true emotional outcome of the episode open to interpretation. This detail fits a broader pattern worth noticing across the different tests to SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship explored throughout this look at their relationship. Some conflicts resolve quickly and cleanly, wrapped up within the same episode through a shared laugh or a simple change of heart. Others linger, blending back into the normal rhythm of their daily lives without ever receiving a clear, direct resolution on screen. You Don't Know Sponge falls into this second category, presenting a genuine crack in their mutual understanding without necessarily showing the moment that crack gets fully repaired. What makes this particular test to their friendship worth examining closely is how different it feels from something like a trick played by Squidward, or a life-altering decision like the one SpongeBob made in Nature Pants. There is no dramatic action here, no chase through a jellyfish field, no destroyed house, and no permanent physical transformation. The entire conflict comes from something as small as a printed quiz in a magazine. Yet the emotional impact it creates, at least for Patrick in the moment, feels just as real as anything caused by larger, more dramatic events in other episodes. This raises an interesting point about how fragile even the strongest seeming friendships can be when tested by something as simple as an honest measurement of how well two people actually know each other. SpongeBob and Patrick have spent years building a friendship based on constant companionship, shared activities, and matching symbols like their friendship ring. Yet a basic quiz manages to expose a genuine gap in how deeply that companionship has translated into actual, detailed knowledge between them. Whether this gap reflects something meaningful about the difference between spending time with someone and truly knowing someone, or whether it simply reflects Patrick's generally relaxed and less detail-focused approach to life overall, remains open for interpretation based on what this episode shows. Either way, the quiz results leave a lasting impression, at least within the moment captured in this episode, suggesting that even a friendship as consistent and long-running as this one still has room for uncomfortable surprises when measured against a standard neither of them expected to be tested by. This particular test of their friendship, quiet and almost accidental in how it unfolds, sets up a very different kind of question compared to the louder, more dramatic conflicts explored earlier. Rather than asking whether SpongeBob and Patrick can survive a trick, a secret, a transformation, or a difference in values, this episode asks something smaller, but just as unsettling: whether truly knowing every detail about a friend actually matters as much as simply choosing to stay by their side regardless. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That same question about what a friendship truly requires becomes even more complicated once fame, money, and sudden distance get added into the mix. Section 9. Yours, Mine, and Mine. Season 7, 2010. Yours, Mine, and Mine aired during Season 7 of the show in 2010, the same season that gave viewers You Don't Know Sponge. Where that earlier episode built its conflict around a quiz revealing an emotional gap between SpongeBob and Patrick, this episode takes a much more physical and immediate approach, building its entire story around a single toy and the possessive behavior it brings out in both of them. The episode begins at the Krusty Krab, where Patrick orders a meal from the Krusty Kids menu. This particular meal comes with a licensed toy attached to it, an action figure called Patty Pal, designed to look like a small character tied to the Krusty Krab brand. Patrick becomes fascinated with this toy the moment he receives it, treating it as something valuable and exciting, despite it being a simple giveaway meant for children ordering a kid's meal. SpongeBob, seeing how much Patrick enjoys the toy, wants one of his own. This desire seems reasonable enough at first, since there is no obvious reason two best friends could not each simply own their own version of the same toy without any conflict arising from it. However, this straightforward solution does not end up playing out the way it should, and instead of each of them simply getting their own Patty Pal, the situation quickly turns into a fight over possession of the single toy Patrick already has. The disagreement escalates quickly once it becomes clear that neither of them is willing to simply let the other keep the toy in peace. What begins as a minor disagreement over who gets to hold or play with the Patty Pal turns into a full-blown physical struggle between them, with both SpongeBob and Patrick refusing to give up their claim to the toy. This fight does not stay contained to one location. Instead, it moves through several different parts of Bikini Bottom, showing just how far the two of them are willing to go in order to win possession of something as small and ultimately unimportant as a toy meant for children. Their struggle first takes them into Squidward's house, where Squidward has to deal with the two of them crashing through his home in the middle of their fight over the toy. From there, the fight continues into an entirely different setting as SpongeBob and Patrick end up inside Sandy's tree dome, the enclosed and air-filled structure where Sandy lives since she needs a different kind of environment to breathe comfortably underwater. This detail becomes especially important to the events that follow, since neither SpongeBob nor Patrick takes the time to put on the special water-filled helmets normally required for anyone who is not built to survive in the tree dome's dry air. This oversight creates a serious problem for both of them almost immediately. Living underwater as sea creatures, SpongeBob and Patrick are not able to survive long in an environment built for air-breathing animals like Sandy. Without their helmets, they begin drying out quickly inside the tree dome, a genuinely dangerous situation caused entirely by their refusal to stop fighting long enough to think about their own safety. Sandy notices what is happening and tries to step in to help them, but the fight over the toy has become so consuming that neither of them properly addresses the danger they are actually in. Eventually, the effects of drying out become too much for either of them to ignore, and SpongeBob and Patrick end up running out of Sandy's tree dome, gasping for water, desperate to get back into an environment where they can breathe properly again. This moment adds real physical stakes to what started as a fight over a simple toy, showing that their determination to win possession of the Patty Pal was strong enough to override basic self-preservation instincts, at least for as long as their fight over the toy continued. Once they recover enough to breathe normally again, rather than using this dangerous close call as a reason to stop fighting and reconsider what they are actually arguing about, SpongeBob and Patrick pick the fight back up almost immediately. This detail reveals something important about how deeply committed both of them have become to winning this particular argument. Even after nearly harming themselves seriously by drying out inside the tree dome, neither of them treats that experience as a wake-up call significant enough to end the conflict. Instead, they simply resume fighting over the toy, as though nothing dangerous had just happened to either of them. The fight then continues, moving through more of Bikini Bottom, rolling onto a bus, then onto a subway, and then into a taxi, showing the sheer distance and duration of their struggle over this single toy. This sequence of settings emphasizes just how far this disagreement has spiraled out of proportion compared to its actual cause. A simple toy that came free with a children's meal has now caused two best friends to disrupt Squidward's home, put themselves in genuine physical danger inside Sandy's tree dome, and continue their struggle across several different forms of public transportation throughout the city. Eventually, this long chase and struggle brings them back to where the entire conflict started, inside the Krusty Krab itself. It is here that the fight reaches its final and most dramatic point. Rather than continuing to physically struggle over the toy, or finally agreeing to some kind of fair compromise, Patrick makes a decision that ends the disagreement in a sudden and definitive way. He declares that if he cannot have the toy, then nobody can have it, and in front of SpongeBob, he eats the Patty Pal in one single bite. This moment marks a clear turning point in the episode, since it removes the actual object of the entire conflict completely. There is no longer a toy left to fight over, since Patrick has destroyed it entirely by eating it. SpongeBob's reaction to watching this happen is immediate and emotional. He begins to cry, visibly upset by watching something he wanted so badly get destroyed right in front of him by the same friend he had been fighting with over it throughout the entire episode. This scene brings Mr. Krabs into the story directly, since he comes out from wherever he had been during the earlier chaos to see what all the commotion and crying is actually about. Discovering that SpongeBob and Patrick have just spent an entire episode fighting, endangering themselves, disrupting multiple locations across Bikini Bottom, and ultimately ending in Patrick destroying the very toy that started the whole disagreement, Mr. Krabs steps in to address the situation directly. He tells both of them that they should be ashamed of themselves for allowing something as simple as a toy to threaten the friendship they have built together over the years. This comment from Mr. Krabs captures something important about how the episode wants its audience to understand the entire conflict. From an outside perspective, someone not caught up in the emotional intensity of wanting to possess a specific toy, the entire fight looks unnecessary and even a little embarrassing. Mr. Krabs, as someone removed from the emotional stakes SpongeBob and Patrick placed on this object, can see clearly how disproportionate their reaction has been compared to the actual value of what they were fighting over. Following this scolding, Mr. Krabs offers a practical solution to the entire problem, one that could have easily been available from the very beginning of the episode if either SpongeBob or Patrick had simply thought to ask for it earlier. He gives each of them a brand new Patty Pal toy, meaning that instead of fighting over a single toy, they each now have their own, resolving the conflict completely and allowing both of them to consider the disagreement finally settled and even between them. However, this resolution comes with a small condition attached. Mr. Krabs requires that each of them pay for their own new toy rather than receiving it for free, given everything that happened because of their fighting throughout the episode. Patrick responds to this condition by agreeing that he will pay for both of the toys himself, appearing to take responsibility for the situation in a moment that suggests some level of genuine remorse or desire to make things right after everything that happened. This apparent gesture of responsibility does not hold up for very long. Despite offering to pay, Patrick immediately follows through on this promise in a way that completely undercuts its sincerity. Rather than actually paying with his own money, Patrick pulls out and steals SpongeBob's wallet, using SpongeBob's own money to pay for the toys instead of covering the cost himself the way he had just claimed he would. This final detail brings the episode to a close on a note that blends resolution with continued mischief, staying consistent with the overall comedic tone the show maintains even after resolving a conflict that involved real physical danger and genuine emotional distress earlier in the same episode. The disagreement over the toy technically ends, with both SpongeBob and Patrick now owning their own Patty Pal and considering the matter closed between them. Yet Patrick's final action, stealing SpongeBob's wallet immediately after claiming he would pay honestly, shows that even in the middle of resolving one conflict, a small new source of friction quietly gets introduced right at the very end. Looking at this episode as a whole, it presents one of the more physically dramatic tests to SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship covered so far in this look at their relationship. Unlike quieter conflicts built around misunderstanding, privacy, or personal values, this episode escalates into genuine physical danger, showing SpongeBob and Patrick nearly harming themselves seriously inside Sandy's tree dome, all because neither of them was willing to step back from an argument over something as small and ultimately replaceable as a toy that came free with a kid's meal. This episode also reveals something notable about how quickly SpongeBob and Patrick's disagreements can spiral into extreme behavior once they take hold. A simple toy, something that could have been solved from the very beginning simply by getting a second one, instead leads to house destruction, a dangerous drying out incident, and a long chase across several different forms of transportation throughout the city. This pattern of small disagreements escalating into much larger conflicts echoes something already seen in the Battle of Bikini Bottom, where a simple difference of opinion about cleanliness grew into a full-scale mock battle inside the Krusty Krab itself. At the same time, this episode differs from many of the earlier ones by involving a third party, Mr. Krabs, stepping in directly to resolve the conflict, rather than allowing SpongeBob and Patrick to work things out entirely on their own. Where episodes like Naughty Nautical Neighbors resolved themselves through an accidental shared laugh, and Nature Pants resolved once SpongeBob simply changed his mind about his new lifestyle, this episode required outside intervention from an authority figure to bring the disagreement to an actual close, suggesting that this particular conflict had grown too extreme for either of them to resolve through their usual methods of reconciliation. Patrick eating the toy in front of SpongeBob also stands out as one of the more deliberately destructive actions covered in any of these episodes so far. Rather than simply losing the fight or giving up his claim to the toy, Patrick chooses instead to destroy it entirely, ensuring that if he cannot have what he wants, SpongeBob cannot have it either. This decision reveals a genuinely possessive and spiteful side to Patrick's character, one that goes beyond simple disagreement and moves into something closer to deliberate emotional harm directed at his own best friend. Despite this moment of real spite, the episode still resolves with both of them receiving their own toys and moving forward as friends, once again showing how quickly SpongeBob and Patrick's conflicts tend to fade once some kind of practical solution gets introduced, even one that requires outside help to arrive at. The final theft of SpongeBob's wallet, while played mostly for comedic effect, leaves a small reminder that not every part of their friendship gets fully repaired just because the main conflict has technically ended. Before we move on, If you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This pattern, real conflict followed by a resolution that still leaves small cracks unaddressed underneath the surface, becomes especially important to notice once fame and money enter the picture in a much bigger and more lasting way than a simple toy ever could. Section 10. Goodbye, Krabby Patty? Season 9, 2013. Goodbye, Krabby Patty aired during Season 9 of the show in 2013, and it closes out this look at SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship with a test unlike any of the others covered so far. This time, the threat to their bond does not come from a trick, a secret, a personal choice, a physical change, a difference in values, a knowledge gap, or a fight over an object. Instead, it comes from something much harder to fight against directly: sudden fame and the distance it quietly creates between two people who used to have all the time in the world for each other. The episode begins with Mr. Krabs, the owner of the Krusty Krab, deciding to expand his business beyond the restaurant itself. He wants to launch a new product line of frozen Krabby Patties, hoping to sell his famous food item in stores rather than only through the restaurant. To help make this new venture successful, Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob seek out advice from an advertising executive, someone with experience in marketing and selling products to a wide audience. This decision to expand the Krabby Patty brand sets off a chain of events that neither Mr. Krabs nor SpongeBob fully anticipates at the start of the episode. As part of this advertising push, Patrick becomes involved in the campaign, and this involvement quickly turns him into the face of the entire product line. Patrick begins appearing in commercials promoting the new frozen Krabby Patties, and these commercials turn out to be extremely successful. Patrick, someone who spent most of his life without a job or any real responsibility, suddenly finds himself thrust into the middle of a genuine advertising success, becoming recognized and celebrated across Bikini Bottom because of his role in these commercials. This sudden fame changes Patrick's daily life significantly. Where he once spent his time doing nothing in particular, often simply relaxing under his rock or spending time with SpongeBob on some small adventure, he now finds himself swept up in the demands of being a successful advertising personality. His schedule fills up with commercial shoots, and his growing celebrity status begins attracting attention from people who never paid him any mind before his fame took off. This shift represents one of the more significant lifestyle changes any character in the show experiences, especially considering how little ambition or drive Patrick typically shows throughout the rest of the series. As Patrick's fame grows, his friendship with SpongeBob begins to suffer as a direct result. The show describes this change clearly, noting that because of his success, Patrick's friendship with SpongeBob starts slowly fading, not because of any argument or falling out between them, but simply because both of them now have significantly less time available to spend together. This detail marks an important difference compared to every other test to their friendship explored earlier in this look at their relationship. There is no single dramatic moment causing the distance between them. Instead, the distance grows gradually, driven by nothing more than changing schedules and shifting priorities that neither of them directly chooses to create. This kind of slow, quiet separation carries its own kind of emotional weight, different from the louder, more immediate conflicts covered in earlier episodes. There is no single moment where either SpongeBob or Patrick declares their friendship over, the way Patrick did once, in the secret box, and once more seriously, in Patrick's smart pants. Instead, the two of them simply find themselves seeing less of each other, day by day, as Patrick's growing celebrity status pulls him further away from the simple, everyday life he used to share so easily with SpongeBob. This distance becomes especially clear during a moment when SpongeBob decides to visit Patrick at his new home. Patrick's success has apparently come with enough money and status attached that he now lives somewhere far more lavish and impressive than the simple rock he lived under for the rest of the series. When SpongeBob arrives at this new home, hoping to spend time with his best friend the way he always has in the past, he instead finds himself surrounded by an entirely new social circle that has attached itself to Patrick because of his newfound fame. This new circle includes celebrities, executives, and other elite individuals who have chosen to associate themselves with Patrick, specifically because of his commercial success. Rather than welcoming SpongeBob warmly or making space for him within this new environment, these individuals instead ridicule him, treating him as someone who does not belong in the same social world Patrick now apparently occupies. SpongeBob, someone who has never sought fame or status of any kind throughout the entire series, finds himself completely out of place in this new setting, mocked by people who have never met him before and who clearly see no reason to treat him with any respect or warmth. Patrick, for his part, does try to protest against how his new associates are treating SpongeBob. This detail matters because it shows that despite everything that has changed about his daily life and his growing fame, Patrick has not simply abandoned his loyalty to SpongeBob or stopped caring about how he gets treated. However, Patrick's attempts to defend SpongeBob during this visit do not appear strong enough to actually change the situation or make SpongeBob feel welcome among this new group of people surrounding Patrick's new lifestyle. SpongeBob tries to find some way to have fun with his friend during this visit, hoping that despite everything else going on around them, they might still be able to recapture even a small piece of the easy companionship they have always shared. This attempt does not succeed either, since Patrick gets pulled away almost immediately for an important photo shoot, a professional commitment tied directly to his new career as the face of the frozen Krabby Patty campaign. Rather than spending time with SpongeBob the way he might have without hesitation before his fame took hold, Patrick has to prioritize his work commitments instead, leaving SpongeBob standing alone once again. The episode makes clear that Patrick looks just as sad about this outcome as SpongeBob does, showing that this separation is not something Patrick actually wants or enjoys, despite benefiting from the fame and success that caused it. This detail keeps Patrick's character consistent with how he has been shown throughout the rest of the series and throughout every other episode covered in this look at his friendship with SpongeBob. Even now, pulled in a completely different direction by unexpected fame, Patrick still values his friendship with SpongeBob and feels genuine sadness about how little time they now have for each other. Adding another layer to this specific moment, the episode reveals that Patrick has an upcoming milestone tied directly to his commercial success: his 400th commercial appearance, which is coming up soon and generating considerable excitement among everyone else around him. This detail emphasizes just how far Patrick's fame has grown by this point in the episode. 400 commercials represents an enormous amount of work and public exposure, showing that this is not simply a brief moment of minor celebrity, but a sustained and significant career shift that has fully absorbed a large portion of Patrick's time and attention. Feeling dejected after his visit to Patrick's new home, SpongeBob heads back toward the museum, a location connected to earlier parts of this same episode's storyline involving Mr. Krabs and the advertising campaign. During this walk, SpongeBob unexpectedly runs into Squidward, who it turns out has also experienced his own disappointment during this episode, having failed in his own attempt to pursue a dream of his own due to being underqualified for whatever position he was hoping to obtain. Finding Squidward in this position, SpongeBob asks him about the possibility of getting a job at the museum himself. This detail closes the episode on a note that connects SpongeBob's personal disappointment over losing time with Patrick to a broader theme running through the episode about ambition, change, and the different ways people respond when life shifts in unexpected directions. Patrick chased success and found himself pulled away from his oldest friendship as a result. Squidward chased a different dream and found himself rejected before ever getting the chance to change anything about his usual routine. SpongeBob, watching both of these situations unfold around him, ends up considering a career change of his own, seemingly influenced by watching how much both Patrick and Squidward have been affected by their own pursuits of something different from their ordinary lives. Looking at this episode as a whole, it presents the quietest and most gradual test to SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship covered anywhere in this entire look at their relationship. Every other episode explored so far involved something sudden, a trick played in an afternoon, a secret discovered in a single night, a decision to leave made and reversed within one storyline, a transformation caused by one specific sting, an argument sparked by one historical reenactment, a quiz taken in one sitting, or a fight over one single toy. This episode instead shows something slower, and in some ways more realistic. A friendship drifting apart gradually because of changing circumstances, rather than any single dramatic event either of them could point to and immediately address. This slow drift raises a different kind of question compared to every earlier test explored in this look at their friendship. A trick can be uncovered, a secret can be revealed, a decision can be reversed, and even a transformation can potentially fade with time. But distance created by success, responsibility, and shifting priorities does not resolve through any single clear action the way those other conflicts did. It requires something harder to pin down, a conscious choice from both people involved to keep making room for each other, despite whatever new demands life places on their time. This episode does not show a clean, definitive resolution to this particular test of their friendship, the way some of the earlier episodes explored fully do. There is no accidental shared laugh solving everything, no dramatic housewarming party welcoming someone home, no outside adult stepping in with a simple solution like a second toy. Instead, the episode leaves this drift toward distance as something ongoing, something both SpongeBob and Patrick clearly feel and regret, but something neither of them manages to fully solve within the scope of this single story. Taken together, all 10 of these episodes tell a much fuller story than the highlight reel version of SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship most people already know by heart. The matching rings, the shared jellyfishing trips, and the constant loyalty shown across hundreds of episodes are all real and all genuinely part of their bond. But so are the bubble tricks that turn them against each other in minutes. The secret kept hidden inside a small box. The desperate chase through a field of jellyfish. The sudden and painful gap created by a jolt of unexpected intelligence. The shouting match born from a piece of twisted history. The quiet sting of a quiz neither of them expected to fail. The toy destroyed out of pure spite, and the slow, sad distance created by nothing more dramatic than one of them becoming successful. Every one of these moments happened. Every one of them is part of the same official record that gave the world a friendship famous enough to be recognized across generations of viewers. The friendship survived every single one of them, in one form or another, the same way it has survived for over 2 decades of episodes, movies, and specials. But surviving something and never having been tested by it are two very different things. And looking closely at exactly how close this friendship has come to breaking, again and again, says something honest about what keeping a bond like this one alive actually requires. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.